she can at least manage our expectations as to whether or not she'll join. And why don't we start with roll call attendance? Ralph Dormitzer,
Dormitzer present.
Corey Evans,
Ray Evans here.
Mike Dick.
Mike Dick here, and I have a question for you at the very top, please.
Okay, and Susan Franklin.
Susan Franklin present.
Francine Lyons not present. Brian Host present. And I just before Michael, you go, I just wanted to clarify one thing. So last week, Corey suggested that we go back and look at the bylaws closely just to see what circumstances permit an associate member to vote or encourage an associate member to vote. And I'm just going to read this out so that everyone knows the bylaw provision. So such associate may vote only when designated by the chairman of the Capital Budget Committee. The chairman shall designate the associate member to vote only in the case of absence, inability to act, or conflict of interest on the part of any member of the Capital Budget Committee, or in the event of a vacancy on the committee. Okay, so I can reread that if anyone would like me to do so, but the sum and substance of it is, I think we may, as a committee, for years have been operating under the mistaken presumption that an associate member was only to vote when we needed such member to do so to meet a quorum. But it actually turns out, based on this language, that the chairman shall, which is an obligation, I might add, it's not an option. The chairman shall designate the associate member to vote only in the case of absence, inability to act, or conflict of interest, or in the event of a vacancy on the committee. So if someone's not here, one of the sitting members not here, according to this, I shall designate the associate member to vote. And that is the case today. And, we will follow this from this point forward. So Corey, thank you for just clarifying that. I'd also just make.
I'm surprised, Corey, that you read the actual.
I'm a little offended, Ralph.
Which leads us to another point. And I was just about to say this, but your good humor is spot on, Ralph. I mean, I think many of us sort of came into this role and never actually read a lot of the bylaws. And when you read the bylaws, you see things right there in plain sight that we should be doing or we should know. So it's not a bad thing to actually read the bylaws, as daunting as that may sound, at least with regards to governance and committee functions and the capital budget's role. Because I just learned something new after doing this for 10 years.
And Brian, what I'll do, if it's okay with you, I'll note that in the minutes that you've noted that Member Lyons is absent and Mr. Dormitzer will be voting today.
Yep.
Okay.
Let me just make sure that that's the case. Yeah, so Francine will not, I have a text from her, she will not be joining us. Okay, so we're in session, and Michael, you had a request right at the front of this meeting. So let me please respect that request. Please proceed.
It was specifically what you just went through.
Okay. Which is a good sign. We're all on the same page.
Yeah.
At least on that matter.
For a while. For a while.
Is this the part, Ralph, where you make good on your question last week or your ominous comment of be careful what you wish for?
I think it's close, right?
Okay, well, fair enough.
Anyway, one way or the other, we're going to end up still liking one another, and whether or not we agree or disagree is not important. I think the thing is, what's our best judgment on this whole thing? So
I agree with that. We've got good minds on this team and on this call, so let's just go through this and have an open conversation. We land where we land, and then the challenge may be how we present it at town meeting, depending on where that is. But let's just power through this. Now, the first item up on the
Brian,
agenda. Yes.
It does raise a question. Have we taken any votes on recommendations for special town meeting where Ralph could have voted but did not? In which case, do we reopen and revote?
So the only one that we've taken, unless I'm having a memory lapse, the only one that we've taken so far is the police and fire satellite station on Chief Justice Cushing Highway. It raises an interesting question because, Michael, you abstained. I'm hesitant to play lawyer here and suggest that was an inability to act. That's
an abstention. We had 5 voting members that meeting, so
that's my take as well.
Correct.
Okay. So,
Good enough.
so it doesn't sound like we need to debate that. I guess, you know, so why don't we, so that would be the only thing, at least for this cycle. I guess we did vote several of the CPC items, which I believe had the same group
I'm looking at the minutes right now. Hold
at the time.
on. Correct. Yeah, CPC 5-0. So that was all 5 of us.
So if we had 5, then we had 5. We're all good.
Correct. We just, the other minutes that I have here, we just have opens and adjourns and minutes. So unless we want to go back to the 10th and let Ralph approve the minutes, we could probably roll with that one.
No. It really just goes to any
Not
vote.
necessary. Don't do it. Okay.
No.
It's not necessary.
All right. So the first 2 items of business are the special purpose stabilization funds. Michelle, let me know if there's anyone on from select board, please. But the quick update there is that is that there was a select board meeting at the in the latter half of last week after we had provided a markup of the stabilization fund policy. I watched that discussion. I don't know if any others did as well. If they did, you know, please jump in on my characterization of this. But my understanding is that our edits went from us to town council, who made some small changes. One example of it, mostly conforming in nature, not changing the meaning of anything that we did. And then they went to the select board, who discussed them in their meeting. They, I believe, made a single change, which was just to strike the sentence that said that the stabilization fund could be funded from other sources other than the tax.
That one caught me off, and I'd love to hear more about that, because the funds that were set up with in Medfield, the towns regularly used free cash to get things over the line. So I think I overheard in the meeting that was maybe not illegal, but I can't imagine that's the case with stabilization fund. We can fund it however we want, but if we're doing an override to fund it, then the override has strings. So I was confused about that.
Yeah, so I listened to their comments, and they clearly were unaware that provision is in the law. And I mentioned that, you know, that it was in the law, but I also said, you know, if it's not your intention at the outset, then, you know, there's no reason to set an expectation. I also, you know, just on the fly, trying not to disrupt their meeting or create a big argument about a single line item. I sort of justified this in my own mind, which we can discuss, but you know, the underlying law is what the law is, and it's cited throughout this policy. And the underlying law allows people to, to in fact put money into these funds from other sources. So it doesn't have to be in the policy in order to make it true. And it doesn't have to be in the policy in order to do it.
Michelle has her hand up too, by the way. Yeah.
Okay. And so I just, you know, given that the select board hadn't even received legal advice that in fact you could fund from other sources, I just felt like I was opening a can of worms to add a sentence that didn't change anything or add any flexibility that's not already built into the underlying law. So that's why you saw what you saw in terms of my comments. What I'd like to do is, you know, Michelle's got her hand up. I'd like to hear from her, and then, you know, just open it up to anyone on any aspect of this. Michelle?
So Brian, I just want to let you know that we do have Ellen Mar and Jean dip hold on.
Okay, and Jean and Ellen, is my characterization of sort of the evolution of this document accurate from your perspective?
So Brian, we are aware, I'm aware, we have existing stabilization funds that are funded through free cash and other sources for that matter. It's just in this instance with this fund, as we all know, we are choosing not to do so. We're doing so through this tax increase. And so we wanted to be transparent to the extent that we later want to add in free cash, if that's our desire, I think we can certainly do so, but that's not the plan right now. And so we want the policy to reflect what is actually the plan. I will tell you, I forwarded this to advisory and the school committee for their review. The one thing I flagged, I think that Capital took out the line that that we intend to maintain the fund at the recommended amounts, i.e. 800 and 1.5 million, to fund the repairs that we're aware are out there in both instances of both the schools and roads and sidewalks. And so that's something I also flagged to advisory and the schools, because that's an important piece of all of this.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that.
I didn't either. Gene, could you just clarify? I'm sure. Did we delete something that you want to put back in? Did we add something?
Yeah, I didn't even realize that it was deleted, and it may have been unintentional, but we want to be transparent to the voters that this is a fund we intend to maintain at the current amount, if not increase, right? So the 1.5 million for the schools, we don't intend to drop it down next year. That's not our intent. We're not intending to have a new special election next year. The point is to have this fund and maintain this fund, if not increase the fund, to address the upcoming repairs that we all know are out there.
So, Gene, I believe we changed that wording just because, and we just said the select board has the authority to fund the school annually with 2.5 increase a year, which was just kind of factually true. I think that our discussion was, it's hard to kind of predict what future boards' intentions will be. And so for a policy to have intention, really what you want to do here is make it clear to people that it's the select board's authority to increase it to 2.5% annually. That's the mechanism. So I think our thought process, and correct me if I'm wrong, my fellow members, was just to clarify the language for people. That way they understand the mechanism and where the authority lies. The intentions are kind of harder to determine because obviously things change.
I figured that was your rationale. I would say, though, that, again, we want to be transparent to the voters, including and to you all, that the intention of this board in creating the fund and asking the voters to vote on it is to maintain the fund, appreciating that you could have political changes in the future, including as to this policy, if that's the way the future select boards act. But for now, again, we want to be transparent about what our intent is. And so I do intend to bring this up to the select board.
Okay. So I think in sum and substance, Gene, you're going to basically reinsert or insert and or clarify an intention that this will be the number for the foreseeable future. Is that what it comes down to?
That we're creating this fund with that intent. It's to be a longer term mechanism to provide this capital funding for these needs.
Okay. All right. Were there any other changes that recognizing that the committee hasn't, seen each version of this draft, were there any other changes that came out of council that, were of any, meaningful magnitude at all?
Without disparaging our council, I would say no. She suggested one change, which was to add in, with respect to the joint meeting that all of us would have to review around November, that we clarify that this was open to the public, which is
I think Chris brought up it's by default. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, of course we're going to do that, but
we can't not do it. Yeah.
That was her suggestion.
Great.
Okay. No, look, it's good that she read it, and I'm delighted that there weren't any other material changes. I know, Gene, at one point you and I spoke after our capital budget meeting, and you mentioned that our choice to embrace the words, I think, appropriation out of the fund, or a spending appropriation, I think actually were the exact words we landed on, to clarify operations out of the fund, might need to be conformed back to the rest of the bylaws and policies that actually call that a transfer. And I'm just curious if that decision was ultimately made, and if you could just explain that to the committee so that if they see that language, they understand why it got there.
I think it's a minor point.
Yeah.
My point to Brian was that when Rob Hillman and I drafted this policy early on, we use the template of the existing policies relating to our existing stabilization funds in terms of how they identified money being spent out of the fund, just to make sure, again, we already had this framework that people were familiar with, but at the end of the day, if, folks are more comfortable with appropriations, I don't think it's a big deal to us. We were just trying to align with pre-existing policies.
Yeah, and I think our committee was trying to be as clear as we could without actually taking into consideration the fact that there are other precedent stabilization funds and policies out there.
Well, that doesn't mean they're consistent either. I think our goal is to make consistency.
That's fair too. But
the entire zoning bylaw effort is to make consistency out of a very inconsistent document.
Yeah. So Gene, where did you and council and Rob land? Are you comfortable with the spending appropriations? Did you land back on transfers? I mean, I just want to understand. I think everybody just wants to understand what the final language is going to be.
Unless Rob has an issue, council didn't raise an issue.
Okay.
And like I said, I'm sort of agnostic. You know why I did it. And
Yeah.
I don't get the feeling that Rob has a particular issue with it.
Okay. Okay. And at this point, have the policies been split into two? And is there a new draft out there in front of advisory in schools?
The policies, there's no actual real difference. It's just the sort of introductory paragraphs that are applicable to both funds in terms of the statutory language.
Yeah.
Now is just the cover for the sort of the heading paragraphs for both policies.
Okay. All right. And apart from that, I guess the two changes we discussed, one being just reinserting the intention to fund at 800 and 1.5 respectively. And secondly, the dropping of that one sentence with regards to the alternate funding mechanisms that's the grand total of the changes. Is that where we are, Gene?
Yes.
Okay.
Again, the select board wanted to wait to vote until advisory had a chance to review, and they've amended their agenda to put this on there because typically we vote after advisory reviews.
Right.
But based on my conversations with Rob, I don't think there's going to be any significant changes, but
right. And he's seen this at this point, and he said, yeah, no issue. From his perspective, he doesn't anticipate.
he has seen this, yes. And I asked him and Lance to put it on their agendas to get that review immediately after the select board meeting we had last week. And
So
is there a version that you can just push her out to us, Gene, by chance, just so we have something to actually
if we could pop it up on screen, that would be ideal.
That's fine too. If Gene, if you've got share power or you want to email it, whatever you want, I can drive that too.
Brian, I'll email it to you. Hold on a second.
Don't email it to me. I'm technologically illiterate.
Send it to me.
Okay, I'll email it to Corey. Hold on. Let me see.
I was about to say I don't know how to share it, but that wouldn't come out quite right.
A little too honest.
Would make for an interesting set of minutes.
Chair Brian Host admits he cannot share.
So Corey, what I'm sending you is the versions that have the red lines, your red lines, Capitol's red lines adopted.
Sure.
Let me see. Okay. They're split into two, and they have Carolyn Murray's update to them.
Great.
As well.
Got him.
And I believe they have also have the
Is this size good for everybody?
We can see it.
Okay, I'll zoom in a little bit more.
Zooming out would be, be great.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah.
Brian,
Mike, can you see?
Yes, Michael.
I have a problem in doing this work in this meeting at this time. We have a lot of items in front of us to vote tonight. We're now up against our deadline. All of this work should have been done before this meeting. We should not be wordsmithing this document. We should be moving on to our own business. What you're talking about is work that is being done by Select Board, Capital Budget Advisory, and School Committee, and that work should be done in the appropriate forum. So I am not comfortable with what we're doing here, and I am intent on getting through our agenda and our votes tonight.
Okay, so I share your goal on getting through our votes. Is it your suggestion that we vote this policy without actually reading it to make sure people are comfortable with the small changes that were made?
My intention would be to table this item.
Yeah,
because
we're
it's
not tabling
ready.
this item. At least
It's
I'm not
ready.
tabling this item. My intention is to vote, like, as you articulated, my intention is to vote everything tonight. So we can either vote this and just assume that the characterization of the changes is as articulated, or we can quickly glance at the document, make sure that people are comfortable that that's the case, which was my intent. I do share your goal that we're not going to wordsmith this, because at this point, Select Board's already voted it.
No, we
So,
haven't.
They haven't. They're waiting on us in advisory.
okay, I mean, we're supposed to vote this technically, well, it's
supposed
not
to be
clear
first.
because it's a stabilization fund, but to the extent that we're going to provide advice, we're supposed to provide our advice prior to Select Board and advisory, which would be my
So-
intent tonight.
Then I think our advice at this point should be on the overall structure and design of a capital stabilization fund. And yes, we should be weighing in on the minutia, but we've run out of time. The clock
We have, which is why I'd
is
like
in
to stop
overtime.
talking. Okay, look, here's what I'd like to suggest. It's been represented to us that there are 2 one-line changes in here. I'd like to look at them. If people are comfortable with them, let's move on to what it is that you'd like to do, which is discuss the structure, Michael. So
Here's the new bullet that got added. I think this is the language that Gene was alluding to, that this is a little clearer. This is much clearer, actually. So, and then you've got the open to the public line here. So those are the changes as I found them.
Very
Bullet
small.
1, bullet, second to last bullet, and then some of the language up top, but everything else is in line with what we talked about. This is for the school capital. My apologies for scrolling and making everyone dizzy.
yeah, so really the only major change is that they deleted the fact that they have the flexibility to reduce the fund.
It's stated up above.
Oh, yeah, you're
They
right.
moved it up there, which I think is a great spot for it. So
Okay, does anyone have any issues with these changes to our prior draft?
I do have an issue, but I can't, I have just the overall issue of the overall intent of a stabilization fund and the tax increase.
Okay, we're just looking at the policy at the moment. With regards to the policy, does anyone have any issue with the language that's in this policy?
I appreciate the select board, taking our modifications seriously and working with them. I think it's rushed, but this is kind of how the ping pong game is supposed to go.
I concur with that. Okay, if no one has any issues with this, the language changes, let's move beyond the policies.
Roads and sidewalks is the same thing. Yep. Chapter 90. And then open to the public. So, yep.
Okay, fine. Look, the reason we did that is because we didn't want to vote the overarching items until we had the policies nailed down. So now that we've got the policies nailed down, assuming that the schools and advisory don't materially change them and in a way that would cause us to rethink this, let's move on to what Michael suggested, which is to discuss the overall structure and to vote whether we support it or not. So who'd like to open up?
Well, it seems we should open up with Michael since he has
Okay,
something to express.
right. It's not my intent to be so heavy-handed with this, but as a matter of town fiscal management, I feel that stabilization funds are a very bad idea. I feel that tax increases in order to support what should be operational, or if not operational, annual funds that should be coming out of the annual levy, it is wrong-headed. that we should be certain that the town manager has structured the annual budget to manage our budget effectively. Now, I do understand that school facilities maintenance is needed and necessary, and I completely agree. In this forum, we have all said that maintenance should come first before we get into program expansion. And the school facilities spend certainly goes to that. But I have a real problem in putting in a permanent tax increase, which will only escalate year after year after year. I would much prefer to see a debt exclusion for the purpose of maintenance of a figure to be determined. Certainly it'd be more than 1.5 million, but I would certainly rather see a debt exclusion that has a finite limit to it. I'm also uncomfortable with the newness of this approach and putting two major recipients of these stabilization funds, two major efforts at the same time, on top of proposals for debt exclusions. It's loading up a tax increase that really is too much and too soon. And I would also recommend that any spending of this nature have some sort of sunset on it. So a debt exclusion does have a sunset for school facilities as we try out a stabilization. I'm sorry, as we try out the maintenance effort, we should be evaluating as we go along and continually watching the punch list as it goes down, hopefully. So overall, I think the stabilization fund approach, while it's novel, is still has too many questions, has too many potential pitfalls for us to just plunge into two of them this way. So thanks for asking, Susan, but there you have it.
Okay. There's a lot to unpack in there. I guess the one question I'd have, Michael, before we move on to sort of the next person, other people may have other questions for you too, but I guess the one thing, look, I completely understand everything that you've said and where it's coming from, with one piece of confusion, which is in the case of the roads, and maybe even arguably the school facilities, but certainly in the case of the roads, that is a recurring annual item, which certainly falls into your argument that somehow that should be part of the annual budget. It's not operating budget, but you could argue that it's part of the annual budget. Yeah. Which I think is where you were going.
Yeah.
And I hear you that there's no forced mechanism to revisit this at some point in the future, and maybe there should be. I know Gene's sensitive to setting an expectation that this is going to go away when it's not the current intention. But at the same time, there is reason to revisit it and perhaps grade ourselves on occasion and ask if this is actually working. And whether that's forced or not, that should happen. This shouldn't necessarily just we shouldn't go into this under the assumption that it's Shangri-La and it never has to be revisited. But I question the idea of a debt exclusion with regards to something that never goes away. Because, well, the debt exclusion supposedly, does ultimately get paid off. The road maintenance, never ends. So I just personally would be really hesitant to fund anything that's recurring in nature with a debt exclusion for two reasons. One being that, we're setting, you're funding a recurring cost with a non-recurring funding source. And secondly, if you borrow against this, I can't imagine why you ever would borrow against a recurring item that never goes away, because the whole point of borrowing is to pay for something, a one and done event, and pay for it over an extended period of time. That's the whole point of borrowing. It just doesn't fit here. So I'm struggling with, why we would do that on roads. Now, schools, you might argue that there might be a less recurring nature to it, but even that, the systems in the schools are going to last you, somewhere between 20 and 30 years, right? You get past 2 decades on a set of systems, whether it be roofs or boilers or windows, and you've got, you've got replacements coming at you.
Well,
I think we're going to get through one school on that stuff, on to the next, on to the third, and then it's going to be back to go again. Although it's possible that maybe there's more of a pause. Which would argue for this to drop down. But I'm just thinking out loud in terms of matching, how do you fund a recurring need? And I'm not really sure I'm coming up with a better answer. But that's
I know
just me
Corey
thinking.
was going to say something, but
Please.
go ahead, Corey, and then I want to answer your question, Brian.
No, and Mike, I think a lot of our thoughts lined up on a lot of this throughout the whole process, but especially now when you said about, taking a bigger bite. I had written down, like, if we have, 10, 20, $30 million of stuff that we identified, would it make more sense to attack it, identify the needs, build an exclusion, get it all done at once, right? And that's kind of been my biggest hang up here has not been the need, it's been the mechanism. Is this the right way to do it?
We're agreed on that.
And so, so there's two things. One, I think Brian was getting to it, but somebody pointed out to me, like, a debt exclusion only begets the next debt exclusion, right? We do $30 million now, 25 years from now, we do another 30 million. So it's really not like, it doesn't really ever go away, because we still have a building, we still have 373,000 square feet of space that need to be taken care of, regardless of how we figure out how to pay for it. The other thing that had occurred to me is that with an exclusion like this, a stabilization fund, there's two things that happen. One, the stabilization fund has the rails on it where it can't creep into the operating budget, right? It's much easier to track than the kind of nebulousness of the operating budget or the annual budget. And that also allows us to do like supreme long-term planning, right? Where we can plan out beyond necessarily where the debt exclusion ends. We can plan for, really forever. We can project this out to the end of time. I'm not saying we should do that, but we can project it out and maybe plan ahead better than we could with an exclusion. So I think personally, I'm still more comfortable with the former, the identify the need, get it all done at once, but I can see the benefits of how this goes and the fact that it gives us some rails where I go, maybe okay. Maybe since it's going to be the same amount of money for the taxpayers, not really, but let's just for argument's sake, it's about the same for impact. Maybe this is easier to manage. So if this is the policy that I'm given, I kind of go, if it was me, maybe I'd throw the rock the other way. But if it's going to address the need and we can plan for it, maybe there's benefits to it. I think that's where I ended up. Does that make sense?
Are you asking me, or are you asking?
I'm just asking everybody. I may be completely off my rocker. That happens.
I really don't want this to be a dialogue. I would like to hear from.
Then I'll hand it off to Susan then.
Okay. From my perspective, Corey, that is exactly my hope, is that this fund will create discipline around this process. I think the difference in approving a large amount is will we babysit that money the way we babysit the stabilization fund that requires that we look at it every single year and we look at how we're going to spend the money. I mean, it's structured to make you do that. And that's something that I like about it.
I hadn't thought of that about the financial discipline, right? If there's a $30 million check out there, you better believe that the ask is going to be appropriately, larger size.
Brian, I want to go back to the question you posed on the roads. Number one, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe there's a fair amount of money in the roads budget or in the road account that still can be spent. I also believe that we, as a town, have not done a good job at all in confronting our need to up or maintain roads at 1.85 miles per year, and that effort must be part of the annual budget, should not be funded by a tax increase, and that the town manager must go back and find those funds at 800,000 out of a nearly $50 million budget. I find it hard to grasp that we cannot come up with that 800,000 a year and put that commitment to that money, because that is roads maintenance. It's a very bright line that should be there. So roads aside, I do feel that the schools must have a stabilization fund. Where I disagree is how that stabilization fund is funded. And that's where we're parting ways.
Okay. So your feeling is it should be a big bang with a debt exclusion. Is that?
Yeah, that is a suggestion.
Mhm.
I feel we need to find a better, less novel way of managing this process. I fear that the select board will have the ability to raise, without a great deal of thought or consideration or pushback, that's a better word, not I'm sure there's a lot of thought and consideration, but a lot of hey, wait a minute, pushback from ourselves or from advisory on how much of an increase is being proposed each year. I just worry that this is opening a floodgate without a lot of control on it, save the select board. And
Well,
so again, it's the concept of the special purpose stabilization fund. It's only being used by a handful of towns. We have no way to know how this is all going to work for us in Cohasset. And there ought to be some better way or some other way to take care of that school maintenance. I just feel like it's a solution that has unknowns still that we will face and may not be able to address effectively. It's just a fear. And I would much rather find a better way than to just plunge into a special purpose stabilization fund.
Okay. Look, I think your fear is understood and shared, which is why we spent, literally 3 hours last week going through the laws on this and the policy and the warrant and the ballot to make sure that we actually understand how this works.
But we haven't really actually modeled it. We haven't really tried to sort of walk through what could happen year after year after year. We didn't really project ourselves.
But we did discuss this. It can only go up 2.5% maximum. That's the law.
Yeah, I know, but is 2.5% maximum may be too much. You're talking about taking money from people without sufficient safeguard, in my view.
Okay. Well, look, I think just my personal position on this is that we do not have control of the operating budget, and ultimately the people who do are going to spend the money as they see fit, and they have. We can disagree with it all day long, and that may impact the vote on this particular structure. But our ability to go into the operating budget and say you're wasting money, please stop and make room for the roads, is limited. So, you know, you know, I'll go a step further to say that since the very first town meeting that I've, you know, have attended, and I've attended every one since, you know, there was a very strong-willed individual who stood up and told everybody that, you know, the growth in the operating budget was unsustainable and it would result in an override. And then other people got up and said, oh, but we're exercising all this financial discipline and that's never going to happen. Well, guess what? Here we are.
Another point I'd like to make is that the search for new revenues has really not been undertaken. And that was one of the goals, or at least, I won't say goal, that's probably not accurate, but it was one of the recommendations or suggestions early on in a long-range planning working group, which is now back about 2 years, that we should be identifying new sources of revenue before, well, I shouldn't say before, but that effort has not, to my view, I can't see it really taken place. We haven't tried to find sufficient funding to minimize the tax increase. We've gone straight to tax increase. And that's what I'm having a hard time with.
I think that's accurate. There's been no work on the operating side of this at all. Nor did the long-term planning committee undertake any work on the operating side of this equation. And that's exactly where it is. So
there have been efforts to avoid tax increase using, you know, putting free cash backwards into capital projects. I mean, I wouldn't say there's been no effort. Maybe there has been an explicit effort, but I don't think it's quite fair to say no effort. Just to kind of give everybody a little bit of fairness here. You know, I do think that, you know, every time someone's hired, or a teacher or a guidance counselor or a police, I mean, they're always necessary in the confines of where they are. So I mean, it's really hard to go back 10 years and identify the one person to say, well, 10 years from now, we're gonna need that money for something else. It's just a really hard exercise. And outside of, and we've talked about this, right, where we need to establish a discipline where capital is funded appropriately. That way we're not here again. And you know, that's something that we're going to hopefully make progress on with the town manager's office and the select board and the advisory board being more assertive about protecting the town's needs in the future. When it comes to the mechanism here, the idea of a general override to me sounds like such a really horrible thing to even start to think about. This, to me, like an override should only be done in the case of this, right? Where the override is protected and specific, and there is a mechanism, regardless of how much we intend to use it, or regardless of whether it's, you know, fully accessible, there is still a mechanism to undo it. Like this does not happen with normal overrides, right? So if the choice is between an override, general override, or a specific override, I'll choose this all day long. And also, I think part of this is timing, right? If we had 5 or 10 years to plan for stuff, then yeah, you know, we could probably think of a different way to do it. But I also think we have needs today, certainly on the school side. The road side, you know, I've been in towns with worse roads, but I agree that we've got sidewalks that are dangerous, right? So I could also say that there's a need now. So, you know, it really is it may take us 5 to 10 years to figure out how to get this money otherwise. And in the meantime, we can't get anywhere. I think that's when the voters come, it's going to be a decision about not whether you want this or not. It's whether you want it now or you want to wait for it maybe. I mean, that's really kind of the decision matrix we're in.
It's really whether you want it now or whether you want, you know, other operating lines cut in order to make room for this. It's not cut. It's actually, you just constrain the future growth. Right. Just to be completely clear.
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about cuts. Like immediately people say, oh my gosh, capital wants cuts. It's not what anyone's saying.
But we do know that paving is going up quickly, right? We know that paving is already, but is encroaching on other things, which we've projected, right? Is paving going to get in the way of us meeting our capital needs that we've already projected for?
Well, if you fund it out of capital, it will. Yes,
right.
it will.
So, you know, if you project this out, we already see that we've got this gorilla that's already kind of knocking over, you know, fire trucks or school buses, whatever it is that's coming down the pike in 5 years. You know, unless we you know, and the town may very well say, we don't want to pay for it and the roads are fine. That's totally okay. So, but I think we can at least structurally say, yeah, this is, if we keep doing it the way we're doing it, it's not sustainable. And there's going to be cuts, and that's just the reality of it. And if people want to spend more money to keep things the way they are, they can. But that is the reality.
Ralph, you've been very silent, but tonight you're a voting member, so. And even if you weren't, that shouldn't stop you from sharing your view. And I understand in advance what this is going to be, but let's hear it.
You've always given me a chance. Okay. You first, you know, I respect what people are saying. I know that, you know, Gene and others and everybody else has tried to figure this out to pay for the needs. And I understand fully what the roads require. And I certainly understand what the schools require. But I also come from a very different position in that I believe that this is a no discipline operation. And in all due respect to you, Susan, I think that the experience on any overrides that we have had, the only way, the only committee, quite frankly, that has consistently worked hard to keep spending minimized has been the Capital Budget Committee. The advisory board has been 100% for everything, every spending, and to a large degree, so has the select board. So I look at it and I say, okay, we're opening up a spigot of $1.5 million for one thing and $800,000 for another. And although there may be some guardrails about having to approve these spending or any spending out of those accounts, my experience has been, unless the Capital Budget Committee does it, nobody else does. And that's years and years of experience here. So I'm pretty clear that the discipline does not exist except in one committee right now. And we will not be successful because the money is available. The second thing is that you know that work, the expression work fills the time available for its completion. Needs and wants fill the whatever you kind of call it, the revenue available for spending. And that's exactly what will happen when you open a spigot. I also think, and being fully transparent, we're just beginning on the overrides right now. We're going to spend $400,000, perhaps, if it's approved, to do still another study about the middle school. We already have one from IA3, which we spent 100 and some odd thousand on. We're now going to spend 400,000 on that. There's an inevitability about this, and if you don't realize it, you haven't been around this town long enough, but I have, okay? The inevitability is the schools will actually get whatever they want for the middle high school. Eventually they will. It could be 3 or 4 years, 5 years or 6 years, but it's an override coming on that one. There's also a fair amount of money not allocated just yet for 41 Highland Ave, either for the old town hall or for the annex. There's been no serious allocation, 500,000 maybe, but not enough. There's been no allocation associated with whatever we're going to do specifically for the expansion of the fire department into the new space that the police have abandoned or will abandon. And quite frankly, we have not, in spite of the fact we seem to be wanting to limit ourselves to 24 firemen, we have not really got a plan for how we will in fact staff on a 24-hour basis with bedrooms and everything else, what will actually want to be put in at 135 King Street. So I'm looking at all of this and I'm saying, this is the beginning of a massive set of overrides to be occurring within the next, I don't know, say 3 or 4 years. And I just think the discipline out of these stabilization funds, however it sounds as though they provide lots of guardrails, as we call them, are not really there. When the needs and wants come forward, we as a capital budget committee, or maybe our successors, and we don't know who those will be, will probably be fairly disciplined about it. I see no discipline, unfortunately, anywhere else, and we're definitely overruled in those cases. So I apologize for being so harsh, but I believe I'm speaking the truth about the way things actually work in the town. And we establish discipline by limiting the amount of money available in the pot. That's basically all you've got. Remember, Prop 2.5 was instituted specifically because there was no discipline, literally no discipline. So 2.5 provided the discipline. We're now breaking the discipline, and we're going to break it some more because we have so many other needs. I'm sorry to say I do not support this approach. I really don't. Do I think we need to do things on the roads? Yes. Do I think, in fact, it will maintain itself? Do we need $1 million a year? Remember, the significant cost was the increase from $90 a ton to $130 a ton. That was a one-time shot between last year and this year. No guarantee that's going to stay up at that level. There's competition in road paving. It probably will not stay there if, in fact, we actually get a new regime, I think, that tends to have energy available for the people. But broadly, you know my feeling on this thing. If I understood there'd be real discipline, I agree we should have more money. I think it belongs in the current process. I think our current process works about as well as possible. Are we underfunded at $2 million? Yeah, absolutely. But if we're funded properly, I'd buy into it. So you understand where I'm coming from. I think it comes from a lot of experience and understanding how this town works, or how every town works. We do spend. If the pot is there, we spend it. The needs and the wants exceed by far what you think you're going to see. So sorry, and I don't want to see a lot of overrides coming forward with all the arguments for schools and everything else, because that's going to happen too. So sorry. And I appreciate all your views on this one, but I really know the reality of this thing.
Okay. And I appreciate your candor, Ralph, and your very long range experience with the town. It's helpful. I guess the question is there anything else that anyone would like to discuss? I mean, do people see alternatives that they'd like to suggest that might be worthwhile in terms of how to deal with? I mean, we can start with the roads, but certainly discuss the schools. Or do you just want to move to vote this as, based on where we are at this time?
Pretty good voting at this point. We got a lot of the mechanisms through. I've had a lot of great conversation with people that have been very generous with their time. So I'm kind of as far along the road as I think I'm going to get with these things. No pun intended.
I feel there's still a lot of work yet to be done to solve this problem, particularly for school facilities. And that we're now in the 11th hour. And once again, capital budget is going to be pressured to go along, when in fact we know that there's more work. Well, I won't say when in fact I feel that there's more thought and more effort and more solutions that need to be thought up and worked through. I feel we've pushed and rushed and we as capital budget have been left to continually ask questions that don't get answered. We have to go and find those answers and push hard. I certainly have tried and certainly been turned down or deflected along the way because there seems to be a single-minded effort to get to these 4 tax increases and put them in front of the town without a lot of discussion or debate. And the only discussion is here in this forum that I can see.
On the school side, Michael, I mean, it meant a lot to me that we had Nick from facilities here, and he explained a lot about what they're doing, and I was really impressed. I mean, the amount of
I agree.
He is involved.
Absolutely.
So I guess when it comes to kind of the concerns, which I think conceptually I share, it means a lot to me that Nick says, listen, we got to do this. We're doing our best. This is what we've done, but it's coming down the pike and we need it. So that's kind of where I go, you know what, I think understanding the resources that they have and the tasks that the facilities have, I do think they punch above their weight quite a bit. So if they're screaming uncle, I'm generally going to be receptive to it, because I mean, every question we had about how you did this, how'd you keep that? I mean, they had an answer for everything. They've tried every piece of tape, every nut, every patchwork. And I think that his list was, we saw how it got sorted so many times. I mean, it was a really good priority list of things that need to happen. I think your concerns about whether or not those are addressed going forward. Yeah, maybe there's going to be an execution problem here, but I certainly think that Nick especially, and the data we were given, really beyond any doubts showed a need and showed what they've been doing to this point to keep things going, which has been heroic by all measure. So I want to give them credit for both what they've done and for the fact that they're able to defend what they need going forward. I found that very valuable in all of these conversations.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Corey, on that. I really do trust Nick based on how he has handled himself since he's taken over the role, and Brian Joyce as well. I do feel these guys give us the real information, the real assessment, a good, measured, thoughtful assessment. I don't disagree that the need is there. What I disagree with is this mechanism, this novel approach that I don't trust.
Yeah.
And that I don't see enough effort going into finding some other way to either borrow or pull resources to solve, to at least get a school stabilization fund going. It's the funding, not the need. I absolutely agree 100% that the need is there and must be addressed.
Would it make you feel any better if we just had an understanding that, part of the process that they outlined is basically getting Nick to give us his annual report, what he's done, what he's going to spend next? I mean, if that's the person that needs to drive this, we can enable him, right? We can elevate him to be the one that, if we feel he's in the best position to make these calls, we can lead with him. We can lead with that department when it comes to spending these funds. We may not like how much it is, we might like the tax increase, but we can at least give the guidance to make sure it's as successful as possible.
Okay.
Right?
So what you've just suggested is one of those creative ideas that I'm asking about. Now, I would think, and I could be in left field, but I would think that the select board would not want to hew to the facilities director's requirement. The select board, I would guess, would reserve the right to take advice and counsel, but still make the ultimate decision. And if the select board were feeling pressure from the schools or the families that we need more money for other things, that if that mechanism is in place, that money is there, and that potential for an annual 2.5% increase continues. To Ralph's point, the spending fills in the amount allotted or available. And so the guardrail, the control, let's not use guardrail, let's just say control, the constraint is not there. It's still the select board decision. And you've pointed out in past meetings, and you're quite right. Yes, you can vote out a select board and put in a select board that's more fiscally conservative, let's call it. But there's no guarantee on that either. So we can only do our best to try and set up to watch out for how the town spends its money and the rules that we follow. So I think we're going in circles now. I mean,
No,
I don't want to.
You've been clear.
Okay, but I don't want to.
but this is important,
Prolonging
right?
agony here.
No, because again, like I think, you know, you're acknowledging the need. You're also acknowledging the great work that the town staff has done. And I think part of this is us saying, listen, you know, if this money is going to come out, we have an expectation to see facilities and see what they want. I mean, it may not be in the policy, but we're going to be asked to vote on everything. And if Nick's not here to give the presentation, or he's not the one leading the conversation, there's going to be a lot more questions. I mean, you know, if this is going to be successful, facilities needs to lead the discussion. So, and I think that's kind of the message we can send, and also the message we can send going forward. Like when you're coming in front of this committee for advisory votes, we want to see the same stuff. That's what the expectation is. I think that's a totally reasonable thing to say.
Thanks.
Ellen's got her hand up. Ellen?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can.
Hi, everybody. I appreciate everyone's comments and how thoughtful you all are about this. And I just wanted to, I'm speaking for myself as an individual select board member. I would not sign on for this if I did not believe that Nick is the person to drive this, and where schools get involved in capital projects is for technology and furniture and bus leases and things like that. This is a school facility and maintenance stabilization fund. And I will not be swayed by school pressure for reconfiguring classrooms for 21st century learning, okay, which is technically a remodel, okay, and not repairs and maintenance, and or new curriculum, or things that should come out of either the operating budget or normal capital budget requests. So I want to be really clear on that. I would never sign on for this if this were going to be a slush fund. Okay, I spent enough time on school committee to understand how it works. This were to be a slush fund for more stuff for the schools. And I think the issue with having this as a debt exclusion is you could appropriate the money and get the debt, but we don't have the staff, the time, or the ability to get everything done in one fell swoop. You know, we would be closing buildings so that everything could be attended to. What would our payroll look like to get it accomplished, to have enough people? I mean, we have to understand the breadth and bench strength of our facilities department and what they can handle on an ongoing basis. And in order to avoid perhaps a brand new middle high school building, we need to keep the maintenance going. And much as the thought process from the Roads and Sidewalks Committee about getting all the roads, you know, in good shape, so it's maintenance going forward and not necessarily repairs. It's the same thought process with schools. Okay, get everything where it's working, and so we just have maintenance and not wholesale repairs. And then the good news is MSBA has reopened their accelerated repair program. So some of these big ticket items, such as roofs, windows, doors, and mechanical systems, they're now opening it up, and next year they have $150 million. And I think I mentioned it to Brian, and I've mentioned it to Jason, and I've mentioned it to the school committee. We need to get going on those applications for those items, because roofs are on the list for Osgood and for Deer Hill at least. So I have said before, the work ahead of us is more than the work behind us in terms of managing these funds, having quarterly reports, what is being done, what is not being done, our priorities shifting according to Nick and facilities. And do we need to increase it 2.5% next year? Maybe we don't. Maybe we only need to increase it 1%. Just because it says we can up to 2.5% doesn't mean we will up to 2.5%. And if we get into a phase where we're in just a pure maintenance, the select board has the ability to take the fund down, to lower the floor of the fund from 1.5 million to whatever number we think is reasonable for maintenance when the significant repairs are taken care of. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you.
But just thinking out loud, I mean, realistically, we're not going to know where we stand until all the roofs are done. And certainly, you know, a handful of, you know, the windows up at Osgood, as well as several of the HVAC systems, and major infrastructure pieces. You know, those 3 roofing projects will pretty much eat up this, you know, the things I just mentioned will eat up at least the next 7 years worth of funding out of this.
Yeah.
So there's not really going to be a point in time where we say, we've got an excess of funding here, you know, in the next 7 years, until those projects are done. Now, the only curveball, you know, if the MSBA came in and took down whatever 40% of those projects, maybe we get there a little sooner, right? And we get
But to Ralph's point, we'll find something else.
Sorry.
To Ralph's point, something else will pop up.
and I think that's, you know, that's the concern that Ralph and Mike are articulating, is that people will find something else.
I don't think they're wrong.
But realistically, I think the biggest challenge we have over the next 7 years is not the question of whether or not we, you know, should be taking it down, because we're going to have more demand than funding, just with those major projects. But making sure, the biggest challenge is going to be making sure that I was going to use the word silly, but let's just say lower priority items don't find their way to the front of that list ahead of things like roofs. Like, if people, you know, start putting requests into this annual fund for school building equivalent of gingerbread, okay, as opposed to focusing on the major infrastructure needs, you know, that's going to create a conflict in the annual approval process. But it's a capital budget approval process. I mean, people have to come and present the requests, and
yep,
we're going to have the same discipline that we do, you know, if they were coming to the capital stabilization fund, right?
Yep.
With those same requests.
Brian, a question for you. Is
Yeah.
the assumption on what we would spend on roofs or HVAC systems cash spending or borrowing?
No, it's cash.
Why cash on a 20-year life thing? Why?
So that you don't pay interest.
Oh,
I mean,
that's not a good reason. I can't imagine.
It is for me, but explain.
I can't
For us
imagine.
mortals, Brian.
I can't imagine that you would say, I've got this 20-year life or a 30-year life for a roof. I'm going to pay cash for it today. That really doesn't make a bit of sense. We have never done that. Why are we? We're establishing a new way where we have to pay cash for everything, or in fact, lots of things get borrowed, whether it was for a backhoe or a front end loader or whatever. They get borrowed because, in fact, it makes sense because they have long life. It does not make sense to use current cash for things which last 20 or 30 years any more than you would pay cash for a school. If you have a long life on something, you borrow for it. Therefore, the need. Yeah, I mean, I don't understand this. We've never done.
I can take a shot at explaining it. I mean, since the day I got into capital budget, we've been having this conversation. We've been forcing the departments to not borrow for long life items that we can pay cash for, because by the time you do the math, if you're paying about 5% on your debt or 4% on your debt over, if you pay 5% over 20 years, you're going to pay
present value of money conversation. I agree.
Yeah, you're going to pay the 200% of the value of the asset. So you ultimately get to buy less toys if you're paying interest. It's that simple.
With dollars that cost less, but
it's a change in policy. I hate to tell you, because whether or not we recommended cash, and I know that the town borrowed for these items. So they did.
On very rare occasion.
Well, they've done it often. That's exactly how it happened. And I have never seen in our history where, in fact, we have ever spent cash for $1 million, $2 million, $3 million for.
I haven't collected it yet.
Just don't do it.
Well, we paid cash for the track. CPC paid cash for the track.
That's
for
right.
the field.
500,000 for the field as well.
It was $1 million project. We have increasingly paid cash for, items of several $100,000. Ralph, I mean, it's certainly true that 5 years ago, when capital budget got whatever, $600,000 or $800,000 to spend, we were bonding stuff, including things like backhoes. But as we had more capacity, we pushed very hard to get away from that practice, because all it does is just eats into your cash available to appropriate in the subsequent year. It allows you to buy more things this year and less things next year as
So
soon as you bond.
But on the roofs topic, though, this is where it's like we know the need, and if there's nothing in the policy that prevents bonding against that
true
fund.
too.
So again, rather than waiting 7 years and accumulating a bunch of cash, which is not giving us the returns that we can because of how we're restricted in investing it, right? We might as well just fix the roofs now, avoid any of the failure costs, avoid all the maintenance costs. It actually makes more sense to borrow for the roofs and get them done in year one rather than try to save until year 5. That's just the math there.
The elephant in the room, guys, without getting into net present value, okay, is you're going to take it out of taxpayers now at the worst possible time. And you're saying it's better to actually spend all that money in the next 7 years and not borrow it, but take it away from the taxpayers, knowing that there's an awful lot more coming down the pike, which you will have to borrow for. So I just don't understand the logic. We're changing the logic of how we've done things. And with regard to what Nick has done, I think he's done a great job. We used to lay out the actual spending against time that is in the 10-year capital plan. Therefore, you could say next year we need $1 million. The next year after that, we need 750. The year after that, we need 2. But none of that discipline, as far as I know, exists now. But we're actually assuming that at the end of 7 years, well, we won't need all that money and this will go down. That's naive.
I'm not assuming that, Ralph. My point was you shouldn't assume it would go down any sooner.
That's right. It won't go down. This is never going down.
It won't go down. It certainly won't go down until you're on the backside of the roof projects and any other massive projects that I'm not thinking of that happen.
And although I think our policy says something about this is not for new buildings, that's a policy. That is not actually what can happen with the fund. The fund could actually be used for almost anything it wants. So, I don't want to argue any more about it. I do think this is a mistake. It's essentially an undisciplined approach to how you manage your finances, and I just don't think it's a good thing. I really don't. So, sorry. I respect everyone else's view, and I know you have very different views on this, but it's okay.
No, I appreciate that, Ralph. All right. Does in recognizing this is on the warrant and it's our job to advise on it, I mean, we do need to say something. The expectation is a vote. If it's a no vote, it's a no vote. But I think every expectation from everyone, including the taxpayers, is the capital budget will and should vote on this. So that's certainly where my head is. Is there any other thoughts, comments before we possibly consider a motion on this? And we can bifurcate it. We can start with roads if you like, but.
So my only comment is this sunset concept has come around multiple times here. I think it's the one thing that we all feel a little uncomfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my question on it was addressed by Paul when we were talking a little bit about how long is this road plan, really going to take for us to get to the point of maintenance. So that's kind of how I look at it, Ralph, is that I try to say, if that is the plan in front of us, and Nick also provided us a plan for school maintenance, then you look at that and you really have to say, what's the delta between doing it the way we used to do it and the way we're doing it now? So there's a dollar delta, and that's the modeling that Michael's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also, the fact that this particular approach does provide some construct that we don't get otherwise, that I do like. And it does have to come back to the voters every year. And if the voters don't want to appropriate the money, then it just stays there in the fund. And then it gets to the point where the selectmen are sort of forced to reduce how much they're appropriating into the fund, because the fund is getting larger and the money is not being used. So I think it does put the opportunity for the townspeople to have something to talk around. And right now, they don't have the opportunity to talk around things, because once they vote on something, they never really see how it all flows out. They don't, and we always say it amongst ourselves. We say, did that project get done? How did the money get spent? Was there money left over? There's no reporting really on how things happen. And, maybe I'm incorrect, but I see this as an opportunity for the town to improve not only the roads and the schools, but the way we operate as a town and the way we communicate with our townspeople.
I'll sign up to that.
That's it. It's a really interesting perspective, Susan, in the sense that, well, there's not technically a vote to fund the fund each year by the taxpayers. There is a vote to draw out of it.
Yeah.
And if we're not drawing out of it and it's just building up, at some point, people will ask the question, why are we continuing to fund it?
Very quickly, people will ask that question.
Yeah, it
The
certainly
select
would
board
have. I
will
mean, in the case of the roads, it would have happened very quickly. It's like, wait, we just, we gave you 800,000. Why are the roads not getting paved? Like, the disconnect, I think, with the taxpayers right now is they think we're not funding roads,
Which we are.
or we haven't funded roads over the past 3 or 4 years, which is catastrophically untrue. We didn't spend the money and execute on the roads. So it is interesting, because right now it's just a line item that's buried in the capital budget.
Yep, and no one knows.
And people people just glance over it and sort of forget. This would definitely put a spotlight on it, and
Not necessarily, but yeah. On the roads, it could be, the line item could be transferred to the road fund, and that's it. Kind of how we do it now, right? We're not allocating capital for paving of X street, are we? We're just giving it to Brian.
no, we're not. Historically, it's just been a single line and without an explanation as to which segments of road.
Right.
So
We'll ask
Corey,
questions.
that is something I did see on the few towns that I looked at. I did see that they actually specify exactly how they're using the money. They don't just say we're going to do 800,000 in roads. They say exactly the roads, which keeps you on your plan.
Yeah, Susan, I think you're right, where if there's an article that's going to town meeting to spend money out of a fund, I think the expectation is that there's some sort of presentation that goes along with that to at least justify. I mean, I think there's just a natural gravity there, which is, somebody has to at least say what we're doing with it. Yeah, I do think it naturally encourages better reporting.
Certainly, by the time annual town meeting rolls around, people should know what roads we're going to pave that year.
True.
Because you're into the road paving, so you're at the front end of the road paving cycle. And in fact, you've frankly booked the crews at that point.
So just one other point on something I noticed, I think it was Medfield, where they, the motion came before them to say, put X dollars, use X dollars out of the fund, but they did X minus Y was what actually got approved. So does that happen on town floor? Do they argue at that time that we're willing to do this amount of spend, even though you asked us to do, X, we only want to fund Y?
You could amend it. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody could stand up and say, I'd move to amend and to strike out these lines or to refund this for only half. I mean, that's happened before. It's you obviously never want to get to the point where town meeting is doing that live, because that means something fell apart along the way, or not necessarily, but something could have been prevented. But it's certainly possible.
It's really not different than any other item on the warrant in terms of what can be debated and or amended.
I'm comfortable making a motion on this and just kind of seeing where we are.
Let me just ask you a question, Corey, before you do that. We've
Yes.
got Jean and Ellen online. I know you haven't discussed it with your respective committee, but I'll just pose the question. Would you be comfortable, actually specifying the spend items in the road, in the transfer from the road stabilization fund to the road paving fund, so that people know exactly what roads are going to get paved that year. And it's just not, we're not just moving 800 grand over without, any explanation of what people can expect to see paved in that year. Is that something that makes sense to the two of you as select board members? Is it something you'd advocate? It's not something that goes in policy. It's not something that goes in the warrant, in terms of a question, but just in terms of the way we do it, in terms of the way we lay out the warrant at Springtown meeting. Is that something that you're comfortable doing?
So this is Ellen. Yeah, I think there should be a plan, and I think a street plan, but I also think there has to be some flexibility in the sense that sometimes stuff happens. You have a bad winter in a road that you thought was 2 years, because there is a 5-year paving plan. There are streets that are on a moratorium because they've already been paved, so they fall into the back of the queue. So, but sometimes stuff happens. So the only thought about putting it on the warrant and voting on it is that if there's an emergency or an accident or whatever, okay, an unintended consequence of being so finite about the specific roads to get paved on the warrant, then we're kind of stuck. But I do think that with a plan, with a funding source, there should come a plan, and it should be a plan that's reviewed quarterly or reviewed biannually to say, here's what we thought we were going to get done. Here's what we're going to get done. Price of asphalt is up, price of asphalt is down, and there should be reporting on it, and we should have a sense of what roads are going to get paved, what sidewalks are going to get done, what curbs are going to have ADA accessibility, implemented in them. But putting it on the warrant, I would have to mull that over a little bit further.
Clearly, there's a need for flexibility, but hopefully there's a way we could, thread the needle here and set expectations as to what's going to get done, what that plan is for that summer, recognizing that, we may need to build in some flexibility to accommodate change, or maybe just leave some extra funding in the road paving fund from one of the annual transfers.
Perhaps that's
there already is cushion in that going into next year. To Michael's point, I think Ralph can confirm this, there's still money in that fund. So
yeah, there is.
They're if they got the 800,000, they could do 800,000 and still have there would still be a next year, and they would still have a cushion for any unknowns.
I think, as you probably know, the roads that are going to be done next year are being done to some degree by National Grid. And the leftover, the other roads that I could tell that they were going to do, we seem to have adequate funds for. So that may be
this coming year.
Yeah, this coming year. Yes, I see it. Yeah, right.
Okay. And Gina, I heard your voice. You didn't put your hand up, so I didn't call on you, but.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just put into the chat for everyone. We do have a draft plan. That was an earlier plan. You'll see it in the chat. It's on our website. As you'll see from the plan, there are some roads that we wanted to do earlier, but for a variety of reasons, whether it's weather related or other contractors working on the roads, including water, for example, they did not get done. And so they're going to need to be moved up. Right now, we have $300,000 left on the road fund. We have not gotten the final bill for Elm Street. Right now, I'm not sure if you ask me right now exactly how much is left. I couldn't tell you. I will say that South Main is on the list for next year. This is a huge major artery, very long, a lot of work. I expect this to be pretty expensive. I'm trying to recall exactly how much Brian Joy said this would be, but as you probably all know, one of the issues with paving South Main has been some of the water work that we're waiting for. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make with all of this is that, to Ellen's point, I think while we all recognize and want a draft plan, because I also think it helps the select board, because we get inquiries a lot, particularly now about, hey, can you pave my road? Why can't you pave my road? What's going on with my road? We can point to the plan and say, here's the plan for your road. we do have to have that flexibility in there. And so I think we would be amenable to something along the lines of subject to, the town's road paving plan, but with a caveat, because we do have to deal with changing circumstances that are beyond our control.
So would the idea, Gene, be to stand up at town meeting and say, here are the 3 roads we're going to do, but if something comes up, these priorities could possibly change?
Yeah, I think the idea would be to say, we have a plan that identifies the proposed roads, but if, something happens and we can't do those roads, then you see the next ones that are in line or how it may line up.
Okay. Because I'm just placing myself in town meeting next May, right? You're literally at the front end of the road paving season. At that point, the roads that you're going to spend money on should absolutely be identified. The crew should be preliminarily scheduled. There shouldn't be that much wiggle in whatever it is we're going to do that summer at that point, recognizing that something could come up and block one of the projects, in which case you might want to pivot and do a different road.
Yeah, and again, we have a whole road and sidewalk committee that's been
Yeah.
working on this, including working with Brian Joyce and T.E. Edwards, our contractor, to try to do exactly that and get estimates a few years out. And Ralph, I know you were part of that process too. And so there has been a lot of effort to try to get more clarity on specific prices, but including into the future, so we can estimate how much we actually can do, right? Because a part of it is, how much money do we have? How much will this cost in terms of all of these different segments? Can and should we add the sidewalks in? Do they need to be done? Right. Extra,
But Gene, maybe I'm not being clear. Each year there's going to be an exercise where we, where we ask for the transfer at town meeting. That's going to happen at the beginning of the road paving season. And at the beginning of the road paving season, we should pretty much have our plan for that season completely nailed up, right?
Yes.
In place.
Yes.
So setting aside the long-term plan, setting aside the sidewalk committee, setting aside long-term, pricing, setting all that aside, each roughly May, there's going to be a transfer. Are we able to say with some degree of specificity and with a caveat that we need some flexibility, here are the roads we plan to do in the next 4 months?
I would anticipate, yes, that's the plan. That's why in part
Okay.
the road stabilization fund, we're asking for the 3 to 5 year plan in the fall.
Right.
That's when you have to do.
So that you can actually book the crews, right?
Yeah.
But by the time May rolls around, it should all be done. And the point is, right now, there's no disclosure of that at town meeting, right? And now we're putting this mechanism. People don't even really understand how and why it happens. People actually probably think that we're not funding roads and haven't for years. And that's just the way it was done historically. It was just a one-liner in the capital budget. The point is now, people are going to be getting this tax, right? From now until the day it goes away, if ever. And I think, I'm hearing people asking for a slightly higher degree of accountability with regards to what we're going to do that year, because, we wouldn't want to be charging that tax and have basically another 3-year hiatus in road paving, which is kind of what just happened. So, are you comfortable, raising the level of disclosure at annual town meeting with regards to what we're going to pave in the 4 or 5 months immediately following that meeting?
Again, I want to talk with the rest of the select board. I can certainly take it back in terms of, I think, a draft plan. Yeah, we have it already right now, and we're telling all of the voters, go to this website, and the draft plan is on the website.
Right.
Associated with the fund, to say this is what it is. My hesitation with too much specificity is there's unintended consequences. It locks us in and it invites citizens petitions. I'm sure I don't need to tell those who were select board members the amount of citizen input you might get on a certain issue. And I think you can have a well-designed plan that gets thrown out because of a citizen's petition for a big new sidewalk. And I think you're inviting that. So that's a part of my hesitancy a little bit.
Yeah. I guess the question is whether we actually get any protection by not telling people what we're going to do that year. I'm not sure it changes your risk profile much.
I'm not too concerned about this when it comes to the roads. I mean, it's paving, right? I mean, do we really think that the facilities department or Brian Host and his team is going to like randomly pave some road that doesn't need it? No. So I'm not for this fund. The risk here is low for this, but I think for the school fund, yeah, that's kind of the fund that I think the oversight is important. I think that's would be expected. If it was just a $1.5 million in the maintenance fund, I think people would have really serious questions. But for the road paving fund, we already have a paving schedule. We already have this already. It's already part of the process. I don't think adding anything extra to it in regards to this thing is going to really bring anything to the conversation of value. So.
Yeah, I guess my concern, and I'm just hearing other people speak, is that, historically everyone assumed roads is on autopilot. So no one asked or no one cared, right? Now we're being asked to, fund a special tax. I think it's reasonable that people are going to want to see evidence that, what you're going to do.
Just because nobody asked doesn't mean the planning wasn't done and the planning wasn't executed.
Oh, I know.
Right?
I
mean, you could just.
I know. I
the
just
stuff
think
is there. If you cared,
think it's reasonable to expect people are going to want a slightly higher level of disclosure under the circumstance.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have anything else. Does anyone else have anything else? Okay. Well, then I think it's time to entertain a motion on this.
I would move that the Capital Budget Committee recommend Article 9, School Special Purpose Stabilization Funds for approval at town meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. We're going to do a roll call vote, and all 5 parties present will be voting this evening. So Ralph Dormancer.
Dormancer, no.
Okay. Michael Dick.
Michael, you're on mute.
Thanks, Susan. Michael
Yep.
Dick, no.
Okay. Corey Evans.
Corey Evans, aye.
Susan Franklin.
Susan Franklin, aye.
And Brian Host, aye. Okay. So the votes are 3 in favor, 2 against. Article, you said that was 9, Corey?
Article 9, School Stabilization, yeah. Yeah, I wanted to give the members the ability to vote separately on things.
Okay.
I would.
I just want to park in everyone's mind the idea that at some point we're going to need to discuss how we present this at town meeting. I just want to say that because it's not lost on me that with these votes, and probably with all these votes, our positions are going to require some explanation. So we may need to regroup another day to do that. Shall we move on to the next item?
I would move, or I move that the Capital Budget Committee recommends to town meeting Article number 8, the Roads and Sidewalks Special Purpose Stabilization Fund.
Okay, I'm going to do this in slightly different order this time, so we'll go around the world. Corey Evans.
We need a second.
Oh, sorry. You made a motion. I apologize. Susan, did you second?
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we start with in that order, Corey?
Corey Evans, aye.
Okay. Susan Franklin.
Susan Franklin, aye.
Okay. Ralph Dormancer.
Ralph Dormancer, nay.
Okay. Michael Dick.
Michael Dick, no.
Okay. And Brian Host, aye. Okay. So that's our 2 stabilization funds, both split votes. And I just want to say I respect every comment and appreciate and understand every comment that was made here this evening. This is no slam dunk. And these are the easy ones. Next on the warrant is New Town Hall, 1 Pleasant Street. I guess the first question is Gene, perhaps if you could give us a brief update just on where CPC stands. And then I know there were a number of questions just with regards to, how we're going to manage the residential side of this. So any updates on that front, I think would be helpful to the committee.
Sure, and I'll let Michelle Leary jump in here too, including as to the management. So with respect to CPC, last week, CPC asked the select board to do additional deed restrictions on the 1 Pleasant Street units, namely the additional 9 that we plan to rent that are not otherwise subject to an affordable deed restriction, subject to the terms of the special permit for 1 Pleasant Street. The board declined to do so. We had concerns about doing so given the income requirements for CPC, or I should say the CPA, based on information we've received. We've received helpful advice too from Mr. Jeffers from the Affordable Housing Trust that we took into account as well in terms of the need to maintain flexibility. For example, if we want to do workforce housing, which is something that the board is interested in, we did look at the incomes of our employees across the town. And if we were to impose, for example, restrictions at 80% and 100% area median income, while we would capture some of the folks, we would definitely be excluding many employees. Now, if you add in a partner or spouse to that figure, and now you're at a household of 2, if that partner or spouse makes, any salary that's in the instance, for example, of 80% AMI above 20,000 a year, now they're out of it. They're not eligible. And so we did have concerns. We've also consulted with our lawyers, KP, that represent other towns currently doing workforce housing. And for example, Provincetown, they have AMIs up to 200%. Other towns have 140, and CPC's limit is 100. So we did have concerns about restricting them at this point, particularly without the benefit of actually owning the units and doing the property management and going through at least some initial programming to see who, to the extent we unroll the program, let's say at 140% AMI, what that looks like. So we ultimately declined to restrict the units, and we directed Mr. Senior to consult with our lawyers about a motion to postpone likely indefinitely the CPC recommendation for the 1.3 million. And instead, we would have discussions with CPC in the interim and revisit this at the annual spring meeting. Assuming the 1 Pleasant Street project goes through, that will give us more time to flesh out the programming and consider CPC's request as to these additional deed restrictions. So we are meeting with CPC tomorrow, and I expect the tenor of those discussions to be exactly what I just described in terms of a postponement. So what that means is that the 1.3 million will not be used as a down payment, so to speak, towards the 1 Pleasant Street purchase. And the way the math works out for that is, instead of the purchase being $195 a year, $195 per every $1 million assessed, it's $220 for every $1 million assessed, unless and until we get further CPC funding, which, if, for example, we did so at Springtown meeting, there's still an opportunity, because we'll be in a short-term bonding position, to defray the cost if that's something we chose to do at that point. But I think it's fair to say that we're going to go with the 220 number and just assume that we don't have that CPC funding in an abundance of caution. So that's where that landed with CPC. On the property management side, I know Michelle has done a lot of work there, including talking with those who are engaged in property management locally, And so I would definitely invite her to weigh in. We've hired a lottery consultant to assist with the stand-up of the program, who's given us a lot of helpful information, including information about the varying costs. So for example, if we did deed restrict more, there would be a higher cost from a management perspective. So that was a consideration as well. We also spoke with the gentleman that Mr. Domitzer recommended, Mr. Putziger, who gave us helpful information. Mr. Dick and Mr. Domitzer were on that call with me, as well as Mr. Gomer and Mr. Kiertz. And we asked him questions about the project from his perspective, and he recommended that we talk with local property managers to get their experience and information, which is exactly what Michelle has been doing, and provided us with contact information with respect to a person within his shop, but this was certainly a small project from his perspective, given the scale of the projects that his company, which is the largest affordable housing developer in the United States, engages in. But you know, that conversation gave me confidence that I think this is a project where we can manage the risk as we've been trying to do. And I know risk has come up a lot, so I just did want to say that we have spoken with our lawyers to get a better sense of the risk, so to speak. People talk about, for example, exposing the town to lawsuits. The reality is, with affordable, with this housing, we are, of course, going to have to comply with existing landlord-tenant laws, as well as anti-discrimination laws that apply, and we will do so. And we already have the lawyers on staff that are assisting on that point. But I do want to note that unlike a market or private entity, the town is subject to a state statute that limits our exposure to $100,000 unless we are negligent. So for example, everyone coming in and out of our schools, using our schools, same with town hall, our roads, our everything, it's the same law. And so our lawyers pointed that out to us as well, that it would be the same here in terms of the limitation of liability. So that's the summary of, I think, some of the issues that have come up that I just wanted to quickly provide an overview of.
So 2 quick questions before we shift over to Michelle, and others may have additional ones, but are you saying that our liability for a slip and fall, for example, or somebody falls down a set of stairs is capped at $100,000?
Yes, that is what I understand the law to be, unless we are negligent. So we have to not be negligent, right? We have to take care of things. We have to engage appropriately. We have to not let our town hall fall to a place of complete disrepair such that we could be in trouble. And so, you know, we do have to take care of that. But yes, that's the law. Okay.
And the second is, I think what I'm hearing is that with regards to your tenants, your priority is employee housing. Is that as opposed to just, you know, flat out low income housing? Is that a fair summary?
Yes. So the board, well, let me just back up a little bit. The board has really been talking about local preference housing.
Yep.
This includes workforce housing. There are state program guidelines under DHCD that apply to how you do local preference housing. We are going to follow those because, again, you have to be careful about discrimination issues. But we would, so for example, if you do workforce housing, that disproportionately could result in younger folks being able to access those units because they're in the workforce, right? And so the DHCD requirements would also probably require us to also prioritize, you know, older folks to ensure that we're not unintentionally discriminating against older residents. And so that's just a part of the analysis there when you add up, you know, local preference that also has a workforce component.
Okay, and is it my understanding, or is it just a myth in my mind, that if we just do straight, flat out deeded low income housing with no local preference, that we have to lose control of local preference.
Well, I'm not sure that's accurate, and I can't provide legal advice on this issue, but what I can say, just based on what I understand, is that you could do deed restrictions and still do local preference.
Okay.
I think that you would just limit the pool of possible people that might be
Okay.
eligible under local preference. And, you know, I will flag, in fairness to people that have come before the board, that there are people that really wanted those deed restrictions. I mean, they
Yeah.
really wanted to make sure that we were trying to focus on lower income folks, including within Cohasset, and we're concerned about essentially having these units be market rate or moderate income, which is sort of where we might lead to for some of this. And so we're trying to balance those different needs. But there are 4 units that have a limit at 80% AMI, which is approximately $82,000 a year for one person.
Any other questions for Jean on her comments before we move to Michelle regarding management?
I had one procedural question which popped up on the last Thursday select board meeting. I just heard that Chris Plex, member Chris Plex, made a comment that because he could be considered a butter, he would have to abstain from votes. And I think he forgot how he phrased it, but he said that the select board, he was asking the select board to go back and reconsider. Is there any clarity on what votes will be changed because of that reconsideration?
So I think this may be a moot point, because it looks like his conflict was cleared based on advice from council following his filing with the town clerk tomorrow. And assuming that all happens, I don't think a revote is necessary, but I did put one on the agenda in the abundance of caution, such that if we had to revote Article 5, which is the town hall vote, that we had the ability to do so to allow Mr. Plex to abstain.
Okay. Oh, but you did say in the beginning, it sounds like the plan is for him just to file disclosure tomorrow.
Yeah, I think he's got the requisite information, including the specific information from the realtor, giving the opinion that's required.
All right, great. Thanks.
Turn it over to Michelle with regards to managing the units.
Yep. So the only thing I can add to what Jean had spoken about is that when Michael Putziger, when we spoke with him, he put us in touch with somebody from his organization. I did hear from her today. I'm setting up a call tomorrow. Happy to invite Michael, Ralph, again, if you'd like to sit in on the call.
Thanks. Right.
Yes. So she's going to walk through some scenarios with us. As Jean indicated, we did contract with a lottery consultant who's been walking us through the process. And again, as far as the property management, there is a local property management company who is well-versed in Cohasset and has been managing the rentals at the TOD building, as well as Mr. Stasko's building at 390 CJC. Because we have so few units, we're not going to engage a large property management company, but someone who already has units in town. It just seems like a nice fit, and we're gaining some traction there. Something else I can add is I know there's been a lot of discussions about the marketability of these units, simply because there are empty units at the Housing Authority. So that question came about. And we have had a market analysis done by one local real estate professional. We're waiting on 2 others to come in to see what the market rents would shake out at. And we also learned that there are several differences between the Housing Authority property and the property at 1 Pleasant Street. So therefore, after speaking to local real estate professionals, we're not concerned that there'll be any challenges in renting these units.
Michelle, I think one of the biggest questions that I've heard repeatedly is, okay, so we hire a property management firm, they handle the day-to-day, but you know, who actually manages the property management firm? You know, recognizing that, for example, in the case of, you know, condos, there's a condo association that manages the property management firm, and it's, you know, and it's a very real job and demand, and at times can be very taxing. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Ralph, you may sit on a condo board somewhere up in Cambridge, if I remember correctly. But I think the idea that, you know, I think there is a pretty broad understanding that the idea of just hiring a condo management firm or property management firm and then collecting the checks is too simplistic. So how are we going to manage this from a town perspective, in addition to obviously outsourcing that which can be outsourced?
Right. So exactly like you said, there will have to be someone on staff who actually helps to manage the property management company, just like with any other vendor. There's that component. Anytime we run a procurement and we hire a vendor, there's obviously that management portion of it. So if it becomes a facilities management question, facilities would manage that portion. If it's a day-to-day, we'll identify someone on staff that'll be the point person for that. Just like we would with any other vendor management. We manage electricians, plumbers, day-to-day, so it would be no different than that.
Okay. And in terms of, like, you know, client evictions, conflicts in the building, you know, who referees that stuff?
That is 100% done by the property management company. The town would have no involvement in that. That's what you pay the property management company for.
Okay.
How is that so, Michelle? I mean, you know, if the town of Cohasset is the owner of the property, and we're gonna have to take like legal action or something against one of the, say someone's not paying their rent, won't the town have to be involved? I mean, in some way, shape, or form?
In some way, shape, or form, yes, but it will all be initiated by the property management company itself. And that's why they get their fee. So if there's a slow payer or a non-payer, the property management company will initiate the proper eviction letters. The property management company hired also has legal counsel.
But who makes that call? I'm sorry, Michelle, I interrupted you.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm kind of wondering, I mean, you know, and this is not, I don't think this is so hypothetical. I mean, you may have a situation where there is a family in one of the units that is not paying for some very real economic circumstances. You know, is the town, are we politically going to be able to evict them? I mean, I just, this is kind of where, you know, as a property manager, we go, well, we can't do anything about it as a property manager, or I'm trying to square that kind of awkward middle.
Right. So great question, Corey. But I think this all comes down to the policies that are written, right? Just like with anything, with a landlord-tenant agreement, your tenant doesn't pay for a period of 30 days. You know, they have their 15-day grace period, and then you start the eviction process. What we have to do is take the personality out of it, and that's what the property management company does. So the town is not involved in the day-to-day running of the business.
Yeah, just to weigh in here, I would suggest that that's very important, because really things like eviction should not be subject to political pressure. That's where you run into discrimination issues. And so you need that neutral third party you don't want to say, oh, I won't evict the firefighter, but I'll evict the teacher, or vice versa. Or I won't evict the workforce. I won't evict, you know, someone who is in the workforce housing, but I'll evict the non-workforce housing person. And so you really do need that neutral third party, I think, that's out there. And this is very common. This is like how American finance works. So on the mortgage servicing side, this is literally how almost every mortgage servicer throughout America works in terms of outsourcing these functions, including foreclosure. Which I would suggest is probably the much more serious activity. Even your local banks all do this. So Michelle's absolutely right. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to be property manager just off to the races. There's still going to be those overseeing the property manager, to Michelle's point, in terms of wanting reports and having that applicable vendor oversight, because fundamentally a property manager is a vendor. And so it's going to be important to have that oversight and control in place too, which would ultimately come up through the town manager and ultimately the select board, presumably as, you know, the overseer of the town manager.
That was two answers in two different directions that were kind of contradictory. So, you know, on the one hand, it's we're outsourcing it and we're arm's length, we can't be involved, and then at the same time we have oversight authority and ultimate decision-making power. So it just, you know, and again, I this is not a reflection on anyone who's currently on the board or anyone currently on town hall staff, but, you know, again, none of us are here indefinitely. You know, and you can certainly foresee a situation where, you know, a decision has to be made, which may, you know, be awkward. So
I guess my point was, Corey, and I'm sorry to interject, Brian, is that we need to make sure the property manager is doing what they're supposed to be doing. And there's ways to do that. This is what I literally do for a living all day long, is audit people. And
but you're not going to do that for the town. So
I'm not going to do that for the town, but I'm just
So,
saying that, like,
that doesn't help us.
this is what you expect of vendor oversight, including this is why we have lawyers too.
Does KP Law have a department that specializes in this, just out of curiosity?
And KP Law represents many towns that do exactly this, workforce housing, and assist them with the programs and the stand-up and the policies and procedures.
So they have someone on staff that's, you know, like we had Sharin or whoever for certain specific questions.
Yes, Sharon, for example, represents Provincetown that is currently implementing this exact program as we speak, right, Michelle?
That's correct.
Good, thanks. Sorry about that, everybody.
Brian, you're on mute.
I was just going to ask the practical hypothetical, which is, okay, somebody, you know, gets behind the rent, they get their eviction notice, they walk downstairs, you know, they ask to see Chris Senior. What, like, where does this go from here? Chris says, you know, can't help you.
Well, so Brian, I can actually share with you. So things like that happen on a daily basis from
Yeah.
other rental complexes in town. They think because they're facing eviction, the town manager can help them. Town manager can't help them, just as he cannot help them in this situation. So he is faced with that quite often, which is surprising, but it's really out of his hands. There are so many laws that protect the tenant and the landlord to make sure everything's on a level playing field. So his hands are tied. So there's nothing really he can do. He does listen, but he does also indicate that there's nothing he can do.
Okay. And really, the reason there's nothing that anyone can do here is because that would put you at risk with regards to all of your other tenants. It's not that you have an inability to act. It's just that intervening would create an extraordinarily dangerous and costly precedent.
Correct.
Okay. All right. I know it's early days, but will our policy specifically instruct the town manager not to make any exceptions, given that such an intervention would in fact create a very costly and dangerous precedent?
I mean, it's certainly something you can write in. You can certainly fail safe it by writing something in.
Yeah.
But the legal ramifications of jumping in would just be too great.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the situation where none of us are here 10, 15, 20 years from now, whatever. And a new town manager just,
Michelle,
makes a bad choice.
The other properties are under a different structure, right? You've got the Coastal Housing Authority or the trust. How many properties does the town manager's office, quote unquote, manage at this moment? I know we have a handful, right?
So technically we're not managing, but you have people from the preserve that come to town hall quite often because they're unhappy with the rental policies or the rental increases.
But there's always a different owner. Like, so are there any properties in town where we are the owner, I guess, or there isn't somebody else who's the quote unquote owner?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have any other questions for Gina and Michelle, or should we turn to deliberation at this point?
I have several questions.
Please.
Okay, number one, on the archival vault, you have mentioned, Michelle, you've mentioned in the past that a new vault will be installed. I have heard from other sources, though, that the archival vault at the town hall needs to be moved. Can you explain what the plan is for all of our archival vaulting?
Sure. So if in fact this does pass and that the public safety and fire annex pass, the plan would be to move the archival vault over to the police station. It's just a natural fit. It's the cinder block walls. They have the jail cells over there. It would be that wing that we turn into archival storage. We can reuse the vault doors. It's already been inspected, and it's common practice that they actually move those. It provides a safe place because it's manned 24 hours a day by the fire department. So that is the plan in place now, is to move that from the basement of the town hall annex over to what is now the detention center for the police.
Next question is on a standby generator. Are there plans for a standby generator for 1 Pleasant Street? Or are we using a generator on a trailer to provide emergency power?
So I believe it's going to be a trailer generator at the present time, but I'd have to check with Nick on that one.
And has that been built into the cost?
I believe so, but I will have to get back to you on that.
Okay. Some additional questions on supporting the landlord requirement that the town entails. You mentioned that town hall staff will be monitoring the management company. Is that adding a position? What is the additional cost to the town to be able to supervise the landlord responsibilities that the town has?
Right. So that's another good question. So it's just like any other vendor we manage, Mike. You know, we have several vendors under our umbrella that we manage daily, and it would be no different. We're not adding headcount to manage them. If it's facilities related, typically that's Nick's team that manages. There's other vendors that I manage. Brian Joyce manages vendors that he works with frequently. So it's not adding another head. It's just adding another vendor to someone's portfolio to manage.
All right, I'm not thinking so much about what Brian or facilities or DPW do. I'm thinking more in terms of the actual process of being a landlord and supervising the management company and dealing with the tenant problems that will arise. So the question there is, who would be managing that, and how does that affect their workload at the town hall?
So that goes back to the property manager is going to manage that process. The day-to-day operations is going to be managed by the property manager. The staff at town hall, the staff member identified to manage the property manager will only manage if there are significant challenges. They'll receive monthly reports. They'll assess the financial viability of the company, things of that nature. So all of the property management, the tenant problems are all going to be done by the property manager.
I understand that. I'm more concerned with how much time will be required on the part of a town hall staff member to be monitoring the property manager. I hear what you're saying, that the day-to-days should run along smoothly, but I fear that tenants have as many issues as there are, lives of people who live in that facility. And I just a gut feeling is that this is going to require a fair amount of time and attention on the part of a town hall staff person to make sure that the property management company is fully supported, that the property management company doesn't come back to us and say, well, I tried to get a hold of so-and-so, but they were engaged elsewhere and I couldn't get an answer right away. So I had to make a decision. And that decision may have gone against what we would intend. So it just feels to me that it's an experiment that we will learn as we go, and that is worrisome to me. So I appreciate your answers. I'm disappointed that we have not spoken with, I believe the name is Lynn Boren from Winco yet. Because it was Michael Putziger's recommendation that we speak to her about the risk considerations. And if we still haven't, and it's coming up later this week, that's only a few days before town meeting.
Right.
So here again, we're faced with insufficient preparation for a significant tax increase that is being put in front of us. So those are some real concerns. And then, Brian, I have some other points to talk about that really don't relate to Michelle per se, but just on the whole idea.
Sure. Let's focus our questions to Gene and Michelle first, and then we'll move to deliberation, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Susan, Ralph, Corey, do you have any further questions for Gene or Michelle?
I think I can reserve them. I don't think it's for Michelle specifically. Just give you some observations. I think the principal observation is I don't think you've talked with the person who actually manages the vault, and I think you might be shocked to find out how this does not work for her, but that's all I can tell you. So.
So my primary comment is related to risk. And I'm not sure if maybe I might have missed a meeting where this was discussed, but it would be useful for me to understand about, holding this asset as a town, as the owner versus putting it in something that would protect us. And an LLC or some type of construct that protects the town from circumstances that may arise either from, a catastrophic injury to some of the stuff that Mike's bringing up. Was that talked about or considered?
So I'm not sure that I have an answer to that question as far as putting it in an LLC. I can tell you we have been in discussions with our insurance professionals regarding the best way to protect us from any liabilities. And we're actually having another conversation with them this Thursday. So that's to the extent that we've had those conversations, Susan.
I'm just the daughter of an attorney, so I can't help it.
Well, and the advice that Mr. Putziger gave us was really focused around insurance. And so we are continuing to pursue that thread. And like I said earlier, we did ask our attorneys, and while they can't possibly weigh in on every scenario that could ever be out there, they did direct us to the applicable state law, which is Chapter 258. That, and I'm just looking at this right now, the Mass Tort Claims Act. that they advised would otherwise be applicable in terms of how much the town could be liable for damage. I don't want to repeat what I already said on that front. And in terms of, putting it into like a trust or an LLC, I think the reality is the town would still own it ultimately at the end of the day. And so if we're looking to try to, if we had an LLC, but then the town was the primary owner of the LLC, I think what you're really talking about is selling the units entirely. And that's not necessarily the plan right now. The town is looking to, again, try to get this project off the ground to try to fill a gap that we know exists in the sort of low to moderate income housing space, which many have told us is a pretty significant gap. And there's a reason it's a gap too within the market, and that you don't see other affordable other housing developers or our affordable housing trust for that matter developing in this space, because there are such substantial AMI requirements, including under 40B. And so I will fully concede, we are trying to do something that is new to Cohasset, but still needed. And so this is sort of the box we find ourselves in, similar to the box we found ourselves in with CPC, right? In terms of trying to find a program that works given those requirements, but the town is probably uniquely situated to be the one who does it.
Thank you.
Gene, was there, or Michelle, was there any discussion about, putting this in the trust that already holds the town's low-income housing?
At this juncture, I don't see the select board moving in that direction right now. I think it could be a future discussion, although we did talk with the trust. I know Michelle and Chris spoke with Mr. Gomer. I've engaged with Mr. Gomer, and it does not seem like the trust is a good fit right now. The trust also has they don't have the money. Like the bottom line is they just don't have the money at the end of the day. This entire endeavor is costing 9.1 million, 24,000 square feet. Two of the three floors are these rental units. And so if, you're just to use a rough cut of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, then looking at $6 million of units, it's just not something that is realistic for the trust to buy all those units. So,
but it would be possible for the town to buy it and then transfer it to the trust. That's what Hingham did for Lincoln Street.
Yeah, and listen, the trust is in the same place that we are. Like the trust is using all the same people that we are in terms of relying on town services. They rely on Michelle. They're pulling from the same people fundamentally, in terms of, again, at the end of the day, they're looking to lean on all these town services to get this work done. The only difference is going to be, for example, who takes all the proceeds that come off those units. When we see long-term, it becomes a more profitable venture. Once I think things stabilize, is it going to be the trust or the town? And so again, before we start to make any significant decisions on that piece, I think we just need to land on how things go in the beginning, including as to the rental proceeds, right?
Okay. Any other questions, or should we just open it to discussion amongst the committee? Sounds like there are no further questions, at least not at this moment. Maybe they'll come out of the deliberation. Ralph, I think you were, actually, no, it was Michael, specifically said he had some additional comments, and I asked him to hold them until we got to deliberations. So why don't we start there? But I'm going to make sure everyone has their chance.
Thanks. Overall, I am very concerned about the whole affordable housing concept and the need of the town to embark on this venture. Again, it's a novel idea that has not been fully vetted, thoroughly fleshed out, thoroughly thought through. The effort has been there, but there's a lot more still that needs to be asked and answered. And so here again, we've got a tax increase that I feel is not justified or justifiable. And just to be really blunt, what is the value added to a taxpayer for providing affordable housing? We have 4 units that flesh out our 10% requirement until the next census is taken. So we're not facing that particular issue. So there seems to be no real benefit to townspeople reaching into their pockets with a tax increase to cover this need. I think we can make a strong case for a new town hall. But I feel that the affordable housing component is a bridge too far. That it adds a large dimension of complexity to our town municipal management and leaves us exposed to unknowns that could be very problematic in the future. I also am concerned that the proponents have rejected, it seems out of hand, market rents, which I feel would help lower the tax increase if those market rents were part of the revenue stream and were used to lower the overall cost of borrowing. So I have some real concerns, worries, considerations here on something so novel. We also have not really talked at all about historic town hall. I know that the town manager is proposing a $500,000 spend, that we as a capital budget will be getting that request. How far that goes, I don't know. And nothing at all about the annex. With the annex, I really am skeptical on the need to raise it, R-A-Z-E. I'm still unconvinced on that. And there are just so many other reasons. Some people have said, well, we need to raise the annex to create parking. That's kind of new to me. I hadn't really heard that one in all of these discussions, but that's what's floating out there in the Cohasset discussions, that you hear, amongst people that you talk with. So I don't really have any further questions per se, just that I am skeptical and worried that the affordable housing component is going to be an albatross around our necks as time goes on.
Sorry, who'd like to go next? Okay, well, I'm going to pick randomly. We'll go counterclockwise. Susan, you're next. Unless you want to pass.
No. Again, the primary driver, there's definitely issues, as Michael has put forth a few comments. And I do agree that there's much that we haven't really vetted and figured out. But to me, economically, I keep going back to what do we do if we don't do this? And I think that that's probably driving this to a large extent. Not that I'm discounting the problems. I mean, I don't really have answers to any of those questions you asked, Michael. I worry about them myself. And I honestly think that the potentiality for that worry could be why the town doesn't get behind this, article. But we've been talking about it a long time. I think we've asked a lot of these questions previously. Some have been partially answered. Some may have been answered, but maybe not to our, not to what we would have liked to heard. But I'm not sure everyone knows all the answers. So I don't know what else to say except that economically, it seems like I don't know when we're going to have an opportunity again to solve what problem we've had in front of this town as long as I've been on capital budget and beyond, to address our town hall issues. And going back and trying to talk about renovating Old Town Hall, and especially the annex, which has always been the part of the Old Town Hall building that we were told was in terrible, terrible condition, and that the much older part of the building was in much better condition than the annex. I don't know how we're going back to that conversation. I don't know how that's going to ever pan out and produce results. So, yeah. So, and just sort of in summary, the affordable housing piece, we've been it's because we have apartments upstairs in this building. If there weren't apartments upstairs in this building, we would never be having this conversation. If that was just open floor space, I don't think we would have ventured down the path of thinking like, let's turn them into affordable housing units. But they're there, and that's what we're presented with. And I think that the townspeople, when they come out to vote on it, they'll provide their opinion, and it may or may not make a ballot.
Corey, I guess you're next, unless Ralph, you want to go first. Okay.
Thought about the whole thing a lot. Had a lot of great conversations with a lot of people, and I want to thank everybody for being patient with me as I unpacked a lot of this. And somewhat to tee off Susan's point, we've been through this process a lot of times, and the right process hasn't worked. But the question really is the cost of the apartments as part of this project worth doing it, right? I've said in the beginning, if this didn't have the apartments above it, let's go ahead. But the reality is these are 14 or now 13 under this proposal SHI units that we absolutely need, right? Every one affordable housing unit's 9 houses, right? And with the current building environment, us meeting our next 40B target, I think Steve Gomer said in the meeting, we're already behind. And that, so there's no way out. So a couple things. I mean, so one thing, just I do want to. I feel like pointing out this is a little bit outside of our lane, but the argument about workforce housing in need, to me, rings a little bit hollow. The select board has the ability to actually address this problem. I mean, 9 affordable workforce housing units isn't going to solve any problems, and that's just the reality. If the select board wanted to do a friendly 40B or do an overlay district to build workforce housing, that wouldn't cost the taxpayers a dime, and you could get 30, 40 units. So, if this was a real problem, the workforce housing part, there's other ways to attack it. So I'm going to put that argument just kind of to the side, because I'm not quite sure that's alone a good reason to do this. But I come down on this because there are three risks with which all three together make this not a project I can stomach. Number one is that we don't have control of costs. So every model we've talked about, with private companies and everything we've guessed about how much it's going to cost us to maintain it. There's no guarantee of any of that, right? We have to do procurement. If we have a town hall staff person, we know they're more expensive. We don't have the ability to make the numbers work the way that a private developer would. And this is also a small project. I mean, just because it's so small, and the fact that we don't do this, and the fact that we don't have staff that already does it, means there's no economies of scale. We're going to be paying 30 to 40% double, whatever it is, more than what a normal thing would cost us. So I take that knowledge and say, okay, well, maybe we can work our way around that. But then I'm faced with the fact, and this just got brought up, that our costs aren't in our control, right? We are held to landlord law, and as was brought up before, if we violate that or we're found negligent because we're not doing something, we're in a whole lot of hurt. I mean, the risk here is huge. So there's going to be a day where we have to say, no school bus, no fire truck. Everything that comes out of this building is going to be priority 1 alpha A, top of the list, because we can't push it down anymore. We can't do it next year, because if something happens, we are liable. And that is an enormous thing. So 1, the costs are going to be way higher than we anticipate to, just because of the structure of the deal. 2, we can't control when they hit. And 3, there's no way out, right? If this is a private building, right, we could sell it. Hey, we're losing money on this. And that's maybe where we are right now with these developers. It's already changed hands a couple of times. We could sell it, get out of it. We can't do, if we have town hall and we've got affordable housing units that are deed restricted and all this, we can't sell it. The town can't declare bankruptcy, right? The only way that we can keep this building up is keep pouring money into it. There is no exit. And I've been asking behind the scenes some of the questions that were already asked here, which is, well, what if we did this? What if we did this? And I said, well, if there was a plan to sell, if we figured it out and there was a plan and a buyer to sell the apartments upstairs, wouldn't that be a nice kumbaya thing to get through all these problems? We could have private ownership, but that's not the plan. And absent a plan that's real, I can't sign the town up for this amount of risk. It just, to me, feels like a nuclear bomb. Other things on the icing cake of this bomb, there's no slush money, right? What happens if something happens to this building in the next 2 or 3 years? We've collected no money. We're pulling out of the capital fund for that. What happens if some of this fails, right? And we can't get these 13 units of SHI online? That could happen with a private developer too, but again, someone can make money on this building. So I would imagine that would work out. But if we fail somehow to fund something or to find, be able to afford a manager and these units don't come online, we're in trouble. And then the last icing thing is to kind of what Mike and Ralph said, which is 41 Highland. There's a bill there that's $5-6 million, just to keep it upright. And, I don't think abandoning that building and ignoring it is the right way to go about it. So that I've got a lot more thoughts on a lot of things. That's as combined as I could make it. That's where I landed on this one. Thank you.
All right, Ralph, you're next.
Well, a few things. One is I do want to credit Michelle and Jean for trying to come up with a creative solution, and I mean that too. I heard the exuberance when you thought you really had a great idea, and I understood that you said the boxes were all checked. So I did hear all of that, and I thought, okay, let me take a look. I do look at it and I say, this is not my image of where what a town hall ought to look like or where it ought to be. It is not my image of it. And whether that's just a romantic thing to say or not, I do feel it. I don't think we will be proud, irrespective of whether there's higher risk or not. we will not be proud 10 years from now. We'll say, why did we do this? I think there are some other things which are indicative of maybe we needed to do a bit more homework. I can tell you frankly that the vault, Jackie will tell you, she probably will say it at the town meeting if she wants to get up and say it, but it is hopelessly impractical for the use of the town to have its archive in the police in the now new fire station. You just don't understand that people need to access those records pretty regularly, usually employees of the town. They need someone to unlock, and there's only a couple of people who can unlock that vault, 2 or 3 maybe. Jackie is one, the clerk is another. There are just very few people who can do that, but they would actually then have to travel from one place to the other, which doesn't make a shred of sense. It just doesn't. It doesn't work. It's nowhere near where the people are who want to seek the records, and it's nowhere near the people are who have to unlock the vault. I mean, it just doesn't work. So it's only saying that to say indicative of what is not anticipated. I'm afraid it needs it, and I don't want to demean what others have done. I know you've done a huge amount of work on this, and I really did want to see if Michael Putziger could come up with some way to help us, but I'm not sure it was as helpful as all that anyway, although he certainly provided us with some background, but he does do hundreds of millions of dollars of this kind of business, so he did know a lot. I guess, how can I say? I guess I just don't feel as though this is the right thing for the town. And I do think, whether you like it, whether you believe me or not, if you put together people similar to those who originally figured out what to do with the old Osgood School to make it a marvelous library, who became creative in what they did, or people who got together and talked about what you could do for a senior center and came up with something creative there. I believe there are creative solutions where you could locate a building, a reasonable building, in the back of the town parking lot for reasonable money, with some creative thinking about how you could manage it. And it would leave a lot of other things intact. And of course, as Corey has said, and I think Michael has said as well, you cannot ignore the original Old Town Hall, even though there might be 500,000 set aside. And you can't ignore what you're going to do with the 1987 annex building either. So it just, for so many reasons, however much I understand why people were enthusiastic and almost exhilarated about this, it's coming apart piece by piece by piece. You really need an independent group of people looking at it with you to say, what else could we do? Is there anything else reasonable to do? There's not 16,000 square feet, but maybe 8,000 or 9,000 square feet, in keeping with what's really needed, but also being creative about it. And I think that can happen. And you've got if you have 10 million or 9.1 million to play with, maybe if you had 10 or 12 million to play with, somebody else could come up with something that would really work, and satisfy the need to place the town hall in a place where you'll be proud of it. It fit in where it has always been, and people will take an opportunity to say, I think we finally did something exactly right. And I know that sounds romantic and outlandish and ridiculous, but I think it's possible. I really do. So anyway, I'm sorry to say all that, but that's the way I feel.
All right. I guess that leaves me to go last. I have very little to add other than a couple of data points. I mean, the first is, I, having been through the town hall process now, I guess 3 times, it just feels to me like every time we get into that project, it starts with, noble intentions, but ultimately the price gets very large. And so I'm concerned about our ability to ever really, in the context of public sector construction procurement, ever really sort of do a full renovation of Old Town Hall as opposed to just a preservation of what it is. So that's number one. I guess the second data point I'd share is that, this conversation started earlier this summer with an idea, focused on the bank building downtown, or maybe I should say a building downtown that you all know which one it is, and a parking lot across the street, which may or may not have been available. And the combination of those two, the building and the parking lot, was not dissimilar from the price of this project. And it would have only been for town hall administrative space in terms of what it provided. Although it had some commercial real estate, baggage alongside of it as well. So I guess, when I just triangulate on this thing, and this is somewhat crude, but this is really just triangulation. I think about a couple of different philosophical, hypothetical scenarios. One is, if someone came to me and said, okay, we can solve the town's administrative space need for $10 million at, roughly $1,000 per square foot. And we can just be done with this whole, discussion about, the admin space. Look, that's not cheap. That's top dollar. Or maybe I should better said it's market rate. But it would be done, right? And it would be done for a lot less than 25 million, et cetera. So that would be very compelling to me. I think on the other extreme, if someone came to me and just in a vacuum said, hey, we'd love to build some, affordable housing or workforce housing. And, we'd like to pass a special purpose tax to the tune of whatever, $4 or $5 million to do a dozen units roughly. I think that would be an absolute non-starter for me for various reasons, starting with the fact that it's never been a priority in the past, and and there are other ways to do it. So we have this weird in between here, where we've got an administrative space solution that in a vacuum, would be an okay deal, and it's got these residential units attached to it, and so then the question becomes, okay. How do we feel if they weren't there? And how would I feel, if I just literally zeroed out the value of those units? And I don't know, I feel like all the risks are real. The fact that other towns do this shows that it can be done. And ultimately I kind of come out with the view that those units have to be worth something more than zero. In a perfect world, I would love to sell the residential units as a package and just have the cost of the administrative space to the town be whatever, $6 million. I mean, we can buy the whole thing and then flip it, flip the units, but I'd rather not have the money tied up in it and have the town tied up in it. I guess it's still an option. It's clearly not a plan. But even if that's not the case, I still come back to the idea that the units are worth more than zero. And I may come to regret that statement, and I may be completely wrong if in fact the costs get out of control, the revenue surplus finds its way into operating budgets, and then the capital bills find their way to the stabilization fund because there's no money left to pay them. That would be, a terrible outcome and a very real possibility if it's not managed properly. But I guess ultimately I get my head around the idea of getting this done, just to get this administrative space issue off the table. It's been hanging out there over this committee specifically and distracting our town management for, well, every day that I've been in town. So maybe it's just fatigue, but that's where I am at this point. So I think everyone shared their thoughts. Would anyone like to question anyone else, or did any comments trigger any additional thoughts that anyone would like to share?
Well, I felt like Ralph's comment about if we had set aside this number as a reasonable number to spend and we went back at the town hall project, could we do something creative there?
Yeah.
And I guess what makes me feel not that confident about it is this continued commitment to not do anything with the theater space. Because the only way we're ever going to be able to do anything in that building is to use the whole building for town hall purposes. So I like the thought, Ralph, but I don't see how we're going to make it happen in that space, which would be the space that would make you, as you said, proud of where your town hall is located and be back in the original town hall. But that has been that has been a limitation on the approach since, I don't know, the second go around when that was put in on by the select board, put that out there as a requirement.
So Susan, you're suggesting the only way to do it would be to basically gut the auditorium and replace it with admin space. Is that what I think you're saying? Right.
And I think, I'm not sure when you came into town, Brian, but there was a design that did do that. And I think they were able to utilize 3 floors of space to do that. But again, like I said, it was taken off the table.
Okay, just a thought I'll share. I mean, I maybe a clarification of a point. I mean, the last go round of this started with a target budget number, which was quickly ignored. Because it was, started as a target, and then the project was handed over to the architect and said, okay, this is the target, but we need to build something that suits our needs. And the needs very quickly pushed the square footage, to a level where at market price per square foot, we were no longer within that target dollar figure. And that was at the front end of the project. That was before we saw the 50% increase that came along in kind of the last 12 months of the project.
So, I mean, Brian, that structure that you just referred to, is kind of one of the 3 parts of my bomb triangle here, which is that I think we can expect that the costs of maintaining this are going to escalate, just like the project assumed costs of the other things escalated. I mean, this is a video we've seen many times before. I think it was a fantasy to think that last town hall could come in at 12. I think it's a fantasy that this building is going to even cover its costs. I think as you project it down, we're I think because it's not right in front of our face, we're choosing to buy the under. And I think I hear a lot of hope, oh, this is going to do this. Like, and as I do the numbers, it doesn't look, for it to work, it's a really razor thin edge. And if anything goes wrong, I mean, if, 2 of the apartments aren't occupied for a few months, if one is damaged beyond, needs significant things. I mean, there's just so many things that could occur. And I do know that other towns do this, but typically with more units, right? I mean, you usually, again, that I looked really hard at the Lincoln Street, I guess, in Hingham. I went through years of financial report. And that's a great example of the state, the town, everyone coming together and saving this great piece of property that was really part of the community and had an affordable housing aspect that was just vital. And it's beautiful. It's so far well done. It's still early, but it's a totally different size. And you also had partners with affordable housing and the state. You had all these things. And, one thing that popped up in another meeting is like, typically, if you want to invite one of these outside firms in and get their financial support or guidance, they typically want to be there at the beginning of the process. So, are we even going to be able to take advantage of those? And that's kind of where, if I have to vote today on buying this building, it's just, those risks just add up.
Understood. Anyone else have additional thoughts, comments? Rob?
Only, and may not be entirely relevant. I was a trustee of condominium in Cambridge it was 40 units, so it was quite large, but what you don't anticipate is quite bizarre. Okay. You get the usual things, the barking dogs, the noise between units, neighbors unhappy with other neighbors, water leaking down into other people's units, and many, many other really, really bizarre things happened. And the only way you could cope with that, first, the trustees owned the problem, not the management company. And the management company took care of the financing in terms of getting the rents, or at least the fees paid. But they did not do anything about all of those day-by-day issues that would come up. And every trustees meeting, we would have another collection of them. Every kind of apartment building runs into these kinds of problems on a regular basis. And if you haven't anticipated that, you don't have the staff there to do it, to work on that, to do something about it, an organization, a structure, then in fact, there is no one to actually deal with all that. And you have to hand it off to the town manager or something, and that doesn't work. So I do have a lot of stories I could tell you. It would absolutely be astonishing. But anyway, things go crazy in buildings that people either rent or they really do. So.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. So we need to vote this. I think people have largely signaled which direction they're going to go. It's obviously on the warrant. And so I guess at this point I'd entertain a motion. I just no matter how you're going to vote, I would just encourage you to word the motion so that, it reflects, well, it's ultimately clear what the yeas and the nays mean. How about that? In other words, you can make a motion in favor of this and then vote against it if you like, but I just, want the motion and the yeas and the nays to be clear. That's all.
I'll be the sacrificial lamb. I move that the capital budget suggests not recommending Article 5 Town Hall, i.e. the purchase of 1 Pleasant Street for the purposes of Town Hall, to town meeting. That is a negative recommendation.
Okay, so just to be clear, if you say yay, that's yay to a negative. That's voting against.
This is a motion to not recommend.
Okay, a motion to not recommend. Okay.
Unless the chair feels like it's cleaner the other direction. I'm happy to do either.
We just need a second. We can move on with this. And we just need to make sure that the town reflects it adequately when our moderator presents the votes at town meeting.
Or if my colleagues would prefer to vote one way or the other in their words.
I will second do not recommend, so that we're very clear in our preference.
Okay. And with that, let's move on to a roll call vote.
What is the article number?
Article 5, Town Hall, i.e. the purchase of the Pleasant Street.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So why don't we go ahead to the roll call vote? Michael Dick.
Michael Dick votes to not recommend.
Okay. Corey Evans.
Corey Evans, aye for not recommendation.
Okay. Ralph Dormitzer.
Ralph Dormitzer is aye not to recommend.
Okay. Susan Franklin. You're on mute, Susan.
I'd have to say that I vote not to recommend because I have real reservations about the housing piece.
Okay. So I'm going to be the sole outlier here and vote to recommend, but I have the utmost respect for this conversation, every point that's been made, and every person on this committee. This has been a very thorough and thoughtful and respectful vetting and conversation. So I thank you all for that. And so that is 4-1 voting to not recommend. Okay, our last item of business, which I think is probably not for tonight unless some school members have joined us unbeknownst to me, but I just asked Michelle, do we have anyone from the school on to touch on the feasibility study?
So the only one here is Ellen Marr, that she's a representative. I don't know if she has any updates for you though.
Yeah, she's a select board liaison, so I'd be very hesitant to put her on the hot seat on behalf of the school, but Ellen, if you have any comments, you're certainly welcome.
I have no new information from the last time we spoke, Brian.
Okay, and Corey Evans has his hand up.
I was just going to recommend, considering we have a Thursday at 11 already on the books for DOR, maybe inviting the chair of the school facilities committee to see if he can attend that 11 o'clock meeting, just to ping pong a few ideas off us so we can get to a vote on that.
Okay, Corey, would you suggest that how would we bookend that? Would you suggest trying to do it immediately before, immediately after? Clearly, he has no interest in hearing the DOR presentation.
I would do it afterwards.
Okay.
And my apologies to Mr. Earls for doing that to him. Just because I'm imagining that the DOR discussion should be quite brief, considering we've voted these things and we just want to confirm what we already understand. So I'm hoping they're 15 minutes. I also don't want to take up a staff member's time. So especially if we're kind of already put it behind us, but some confirmation is good.
Okay.
So that's
do others feel like their conversation with DOR needs to run, longer than that? How much time do people feel like we should allot for the DOR conversation?
Half an hour. I would think. This is not a hard conversation. This is just to confirm what we think. So
I agree with that, but I also don't want to cut anyone short to the extent that they really want to dig in. Michael, are you comfortable with a half an hour?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's shoot for half an hour with DOR. Our second question is, are people on this call available at 10:30 if Mr. Earls is able to join us and willing to join us?
Well, isn't the DOR scheduled for 11? Isn't that correct?
Oh, I'm sorry. I misspoke. It's getting late. My brain's fried. But if it's 11, then it would be 11:30. Are people
11:30, right?
Available and willing to meet with Jason at 11:30 on Thursday? I am.
Okay. No, the anticipation was this would be a face-to-face meeting. They were going to get a room. So that sounds as though we need to sort out whether or not this is a Zoom meeting or a combined meeting or something of the sort here. So this isn't clear, right?
No, DOR is a Zoom, is it not?
Yeah, email and Zoom.
Was it a Zoom? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
and I would suggest Jason Earls would be a Zoom as well. I wouldn't want to force people to travel.
Right.
No, if you don't mind, I really probably ought to join my wife who's been waiting and waiting and waiting for me, okay? And I think there's nothing I need to
Okay, just
on.
two very quick questions, Rob. Are you good for Thursday at 11:30, number one, with
Yes.
Jason?
Yeah, as long as it doesn't go too long. Gosh,
Understood.
Thursday,
And,
make sure
and
I'm okay,
second
but
question, second question is, if he's not available at that time, are you available Thursday night?
I think Thursday night, actually, I prefer Thursday evening, I think, over Thursday at 11:30, to be honest with you. So.
Okay, and if
I
it's
have a
Thursday,
conflict Thursday night.
you have a conflict Thursday night. Okay, Ralph, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
The rest of us will try to wrap this up.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so
We have minutes left.
yeah, so we have minutes left, and Ralph is left at at 8:30.
Yeah.
And okay, and Michael, you said you have a conflict Thursday night. You'd prefer
Yes.
Thursday during the day. Okay,
Yep.
and if neither of those work, if your conflict and Jason's conflict, if Jason can't do the morning and you can't do the evening, are people okay spilling this into Friday at some point?
No,
No.
no.
Okay.
We have received, I believe we've received their presentation, have we? And
On a
I would
feasibility study, I mean, it's literally one line. It's one line. This
Okay.
is feasibility study,
that-
$300,000.
we've had weeks upon weeks for someone to come and support it. I'd be comfortable taking a vote based on just the information we've been given. You know, we have bent over backwards to provide, to accommodate the school committee on this question. And I am not willing to take it now to the very end of the road.
Mhm.
Someone should have been here tonight to support this.
Understood. Okay, Susan?
Corey, do you still have the stabilization fund document? Because I thought I saw a section of that referring to the feasibility study.
We
It shouldn't.
knocked that out of the language, or the select board knocked that out of the language a while back. The most recent version, I don't think had it in there. Did you see it?
Well, I don't know if I saw it there or in our prior version, but
It was in a prior version.
Correct, yeah.
It should not be in the current.
It's not. I just did a word search here. I can
Okay.
share. Do you want me to share?
okay,
So you-
thank you. No, I just wanted to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Brian,
that-
just to be
that's what Ellen
clear,
said.
I'm sorry, Corey, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, I mean, based on what Ellen had said previously, and I think other select board members have been pretty clear about the purposes of the fund and not having it go to feasibility studies. So
Mike?
Just to be clear, I'm willing to meet at 11. I'm sorry, at 11:30.
Mhm.
And I leave it to the school committee to get a representative there.
school facilities.
School
The school
facility.
facilities,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Get somebody there.
Look, we will, that will be the starting point, Michael. The question I'm raising is where does it go from there if he can't do that slot? I mean, he too has
And
commitments.
I would probably move
Yeah.
to not recommend.
Okay. And so that, okay, I appreciate that. I do need to pull the other committee members just to understand their availability if Jason comes back with a different time. Corey, you're available Thursday night. How about Friday?
1 second. I don't like Thursday night, but I can move stuff around. So
I don't like any of it. I'm trying to,
I can make time Thursday.
I'm trying to be able to be in a position to say we did everything we possibly could to provide an audience.
I will move stuff around. The only thing I can't do is Wednesday. So outside of that, I will make time.
Well, Wednesday's not an issue because we missed the
know.
posting deadline. So.
Right, but Brian, I
Yeah.
would really hope that you would get 5 voting members. If I can't make it, then
Okay.
Francine would have to be here with Ralph.
Okay.
I don't think it's right to ask our committee on short notice to come to a Thursday evening meeting when one person absolutely has a conflict.
Okay. Okay. Let me see if we can get him there. And if he can't be there, then we have to do the next best or least worst alternative, Michael. That's all I can do.
Yep.
But I totally hear what you're saying. And yes, 5 votes is much more appropriate than losing votes, particularly on a controversial topic like this. Susan?
I'm available.
Okay. And I will do what's necessary to be available. Corey, can I leave this with you?
Yes. I will do my
Okay.
best.
To try and get Jason to engage with us, that would be great.
Yeah.
And the last topic is minutes. We've got 3 sets of minutes. I don't know if people have had a chance to go through them. If they have, this can be very quick. If they have not, we should postpone until such time that people have the chance to go through them.
I have no problem with them, but I wrote them, so I'm not going
Okay. I've been through them. I have no problem with them. Susan, Michael?
I'm prepared to vote on them.
Okay, Michael?
I'm not, but you guys go ahead. I don't think you need my vote to approve. I'll just abstain.
No,
Okay.
Mike, if you want to make changes, we'll make changes. I mean, these should not be controversial. So, we want to get them done as long as we don't sit on our hands, but there's no reason to push.
I'm perfectly happy to sit here, Mike, they're each one page each. They're not heavy.
Yeah.
If you would like to read them and you're comfortable with that, I'm perfectly happy sitting and waiting. I just don't want to force people to stay if they don't want to.
Okay, let's vote on October 10th. That's the first one I pulled up.
Okay.
Can you form that in motion?
I motion to approve. Why does it say 10-12?
So do I have a naming problem here?
Yeah, I clicked on 10-3 and it shows.
It
10,
says October 10. Yeah. The October 3 minutes, I think, say October 10.
Yes.
Yeah, so that should be October
3.
Sorry about that. I was copying the same file. So
Okay, so I'm just going to change that to October 3. So I move that we accept the minutes for October 3rd.
Second? Anyone second?
Susan, if you can second. All right, thank you.
Great. All right. Roll call vote. Michael Dick,
Michael Dick, aye.
Brian Host, aye. Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, I.
Corey Evans.
Corey Evans, aye.
Great. So October 3rd are passed.
I've made that clerical correction right now.
Okay. On to October 12th.
I move we accept the minutes for October 12th.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Great. Roll call vote. Michael Dick,
Michael Dick, aye.
Brian Host, aye. Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, I.
Corey Evans.
Corey Evans, aye.
Great. Pass our minutes for the 12th, then on to the 23rd.
I move we accept the minutes for October 23rd, 2023.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Great. Roll call vote. Mike Dick,
Mike Dick, aye.
Brian Host, aye. Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, I.
Corey Evans.
Corey Evans, aye.
Great. And I think that's it for our minutes. That's it for.
No,
our-
October 30.
Nope.
We have 30 as well.
One more.
Oh, I did not see those.
The final one.
There's 4 lines on it.
Well, if it's 4 lines on it, why don't you read them to me? Because that'll be faster than me actually pulling up.
Sure.
this document.
Okay.
Or if you
Meeting
share it,
open.
if someone can share it.
I can
that's
share
fine.
it. I got you.
Okay.
It's.
Well, go ahead, Corey, you read.
There you go. Shared.
Looks great to me. Thank you.
Corey, there's just a typo in language.
Language. Let me see. Yep. Language. Okay.
Yeah.
I also didn't bold this. So with that edit done, and Mike, I don't know, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll move we accept the minutes for October 30, 2023.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Great.
Second.
Roll call vote. Mike Dick,
Aye.
Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, I.
Brian Host, aye. Corey Evans.
Corey Evans, aye.
Great. Our minutes are all approved.
We'll submit them to the clerk.
We'll get those to the clerk. Do we have any other topics not reasonably known?
Nope.
Okay. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I will move to adjourn and want to thank everyone that joined us. Jean and Ellen, and then we had several attendees in the sidebar that joined us, including Chief Sylvia. So just thank you for listening in and appreciate all your input. So I move to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call vote. Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, I.
Michael Dick,
Mike Dick, aye.
Corey Evans,
Corey Evans, aye.
Brian Host, aye. We are adjourned. The time is 8:40. Thank you, everyone, for a very thoughtful discussion this evening.
Mhm. Good,
And
thank you.
and the candor that's required in order for us to work together as a team. So I
Right.
really appreciate it.
Mhm.
And thank you, Michelle and Jean, for your patience and your participation.
Yep.
With that, we're adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.